The CEO's eyes were closed, but she wasn't sleeping. Evelyn Harper had built a billion-dollar empire by watching people when they thought no one was looking. Tonight, alone in the glass tower that bore her company's name, she wanted to know what kind of man worked in the shadows of her success. The night janitor entered at 2:47 a.m., pushing his cart with the careful quiet of someone used to being invisible. He didn't know she was testing him. He didn't know that in 60 seconds he would say something that would unravel everything she thought she understood about power, protection, and the promises we make to the dead. If you want to see how a single moment of kindness can expose a company's darkest secrets, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The 53rd floor of Harper Industries never slept, but at this hour, it pretended to. Evelyn Harper sat motionless in the leather chair of Conference Room C, her breathing deliberately slow, her posture carefully arranged to suggest exhaustion rather than observation. Through her barely closed eyelids, she watched the reflection in the darkened window, waiting. She had learned this trick from her father, the man who had built this company from nothing and taught her that true character only revealed itself when people believed they were alone. Board members who smiled in daylight meetings showed their real faces in empty hallways. Executives who praised collaboration sabotaged rivals when the lights went down. And Evelyn, who had spent 15 years climbing from junior analyst to CEO, had made it her business to know exactly who people were when the performance ended. Tonight, she was testing the night janitor. His name was Noah Brooks, according to the employee database. 34 years old, employed for 8 months, consistently punctual, no disciplinary issues, the kind of anonymous efficiency that corporate systems loved and corporate leadership ignored. She had never spoken to him, had never really looked at him, until last week when her head of security mentioned something unusual. The night janitor on 53 asked about the mechanical room access logs, Tom Reeves had said during their weekly briefing, wanted to know why certain systems were running during off hours when the floors were supposed to be empty. Most CEOs would have dismissed it. Evelyn had built her career on not dismissing anything. What did you tell him? She had asked. That it wasn't his concern, that he should focus on his job. And did he? Tom had hesitated. He did his job. But he kept looking, not in a suspicious way, more like concern. Concern. The word had stayed with her for 3 days. In a building full of people paid to care about quarterly earnings and shareholder value, the janitor was concerned about systems running in empty spaces. It was either remarkably naive or remarkably observant. Evelyn needed to know which. So tonight she had stayed late, dismissed her assistant, turned off most of the lights, positioned herself in the conference room with the glass walls where anyone passing by could see her, and she had waited. The soft squeak of cartwheels announced his arrival at 2:47 a.m., exactly on schedule. Evelyn controlled her breathing, kept her face relaxed, her body still. Through the reflection, she watched him approach. Noah Brooks moved with the economical grace of someone who had learned to navigate spaces without disturbing them. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and the kind of weathered hands that came from years of physical work. His uniform was clean but worn, the Harper Industries logo fading on the pocket. He pushed his cart with one hand, the other holding a spray bottle with the casual competence of long practice. He paused outside the conference room, noticing her through the glass wall. Evelyn watched his reflection as he stood there, perfectly still, deciding what to do. The easy choice would be to move on, come back later when the room was empty. That was what most people would do. Avoid the complication of a sleeping executive. Instead, he carefully opened the door. The quiet click of the latch seemed loud in the silence. Noah entered slowly, his movements even more careful now, clearly trying not to wake her. Evelyn maintained her facade of sleep, tracking his approach through the window's reflection and the subtle awareness of his presence in the room. He didn't start cleaning immediately. She heard him set down the spray bottle, heard the soft rustle of fabric. Then she felt it. The weight of something being draped gently across her shoulders. A jacket. His jacket. His worn denim, still warm from his body, smelling faintly of laundry detergent and clean work. What happened next, Evelyn would remember for the rest of her life. Noah's voice, barely above a whisper, so quiet she almost missed it, I'm sorry I couldn't keep her warm, but I can keep you warm. I promise. No one should be alone in the cold. Not again. Never again. The words hit her like a physical blow. There was something in his tone. Not madness, not confusion, but a grief so deep and so carefully controlled that it had transformed into an iron vow. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to someone who wasn't there, someone he had failed to protect. Evelyn's carefully maintained composure nearly cracked. She wanted to open her eyes, wanted to demand an explanation, wanted to understand what tragedy had carved that kind of promise into a man's soul. But she held still, barely breathing, as Noah moved away. She heard him cleaning, the soft spray of solution, the gentle wipe of cloth on glass, the careful attention to detail that suggested he took pride in work that most people considered beneath notice. He worked around her without making a sound, treating her presence with a respect that felt almost protective. 15 minutes later, he was gone. The conference room gleamed. The jacket remained on her shoulders. Evelyn sat up slowly, her heart beating harder than it had during any hostile takeover negotiation. She pulled the jacket closer, feeling the worn fabric, the weight of it, the lingering warmth. In the pocket, she found a small photograph, bent at the corners. A woman with kind eyes and a little girl with ribbons in her hair. On the back, written in careful print, Emma and Lily, Maine, 2019. 5 years ago. Evelyn stared at the photo, at the woman who was clearly gone, at the child who would be older now, and something shifted in her chest. Something uncomfortable and unfamiliar. She had built her empire on reading people, on understanding motivation, on knowing exactly what drove human behavior. She understood greed. She understood ambition. She understood fear and pride and the desperate hunger for success. But this quiet vow to a ghost, this promise to protect strangers from a cold he couldn't protect someone else from, this she didn't understand at all. Evelyn stood, still holding the jacket, and walked to the window. Below, the city sprawled in a carpet of lights, millions of people living millions of stories she would never know. Somewhere down there, Noah Brooks was probably heading home to his daughter, carrying the weight of a promise that seemed to govern his entire life. And up here, in her glass tower, Evelyn realized she had just discovered something far more valuable than efficiency ratings or clean floors. She had discovered someone who still believed in promises. The next morning, Evelyn called her head of security into her office. Tom Reeves arrived promptly at 8, his expression already guarded. He knew that tone in her voice, the one that meant something had shifted in the careful equilibrium of Harper Industries. "Tell me about Noah Brooks," Evelyn said without preamble. Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. "The janitor? What about him?" "Everything. Where he came from, why he's here, what he was before this. With respect, Ms. Harper, he's a night janitor. His background check was clean. He does his job. That's all we need to know." "No," Evelyn said quietly. "That's all we bothered to know. There's a difference." She watched Tom process this, saw the moment he decided to take her seriously. He pulled out his phone, accessing files. "Noah Brooks, hired 8 months ago through the standard service company we contract with. Previous employment was, let me see, construction work in Maine, some automotive repair, general maintenance. No college degree. References checked out. Lives in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens with his 6-year-old daughter, single father, wife deceased." "How did she die?" Tom looked up, surprised by the question. "I don't have that information. We don't typically find out." "Ms. Harper, I'm not sure this is—" "Tom." Evelyn's voice carried the steel that had made her famous in boardrooms across 3 continents. "When I ask you to find something out, I'm not requesting your opinion on whether it's relevant. I'm telling you to do it." "Yes, ma'am." After he left, Evelyn sat alone in her office, Noah's jacket folded carefully on the chair beside her desk. She had meant to return it immediately, had meant to summon him up here, hand it back with a polite thanks, maintain the proper distance between executive and employee. But something stopped her. The photograph in the pocket. The promise whispered in the dark. The question of what kind of man made a vow like that and actually meant it. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Chen, her CFO, reminding her about the merger meeting at 10. The Titan acquisition was entering its final phase, a $3.2 billion deal that would double Harper Industries' market share and cement her reputation as one of the most successful CEOs of her generation. Evelyn had spent 18 months engineering this merger, had outmaneuvered 3 competitor bids, had negotiated terms that would make her board members weep with joy when the announcement went public next month. But as she prepared for the meeting, gathering files and financial projections, she kept thinking about the janitor who noticed systems running in empty spaces, about the kind of attention to detail that came from actually caring about what happened in the dark. The merger meeting lasted 4 hours. Lawyers and accountants filled 2 conference rooms, reviewing final documentation, confirming compliance standards, ensuring every clause of the agreement was ironclad. Evelyn presided over it all with her usual precision, catching discrepancies that others missed, pushing back on language that seemed too vague, demanding clarity where others were willing to accept ambiguity. "You're in rare form today," Marcus murmured during a brief break, even more detail-oriented than usual. "What's got you so focused?" Evelyn considered the question. "Just making sure we're not missing anything important." "We're not. I've triple-checked everything. This deal is clean." "Then we have nothing to worry about." But as the meeting concluded, as everyone congratulated themselves on the impending success, Evelyn found herself thinking about Noah's question to security, about systems running when buildings should be empty, about the things people noticed when they weren't blinded by the promise of profit. That night, she stayed late again. Same conference room, same carefully arranged posture of sleep, same test. Noah arrived at 2:48 a.m., 1 minute later than the previous night. He paused when he saw her in the same position, same chair, and something flickered across his face. Not suspicion exactly, but awareness. The kind of recognition that came from being observant. He entered the room anyway, moved to his cart, pulled out another jacket, different from yesterday's, a worn hoodie this time, and draped it gently across her shoulders. "I know you're probably not cold," he whispered to the empty room. "But just in case you need someone to notice. I notice. I promise." Then he did something that made Evelyn's breath catch. He walked to the far window, the one that overlooked the mechanical systems on the roof of the building's lower section. He stood there for a long moment, staring down at something she couldn't see from her position. "The auxiliary power's running again," he said softly, still talking to himself or to ghosts. "Third night this week. Nobody's supposed to be here, but something's running. Something's using power nobody's accounting for." He stood there for another minute, then shook his head slightly and returned to cleaning. When he finished, he left as quietly as he had come, the hoodie still warm on Evelyn's shoulders. This time, when she sat up, Evelyn didn't just examine what he'd left behind. She walked to the window where he had stood and looked down at the mechanical systems below. Everything appeared normal. Clean lines of ventilation units, power distribution boxes, the standard infrastructure of a modern office building. But as she watched, she noticed something, a faint shimmer in the air above one section, barely visible against the night sky. Heat, rising from system that should have been in standby mode. Evelyn pulled out her phone and called Tom Reeves directly. "I need the power usage reports for building mechanicals," she said when he answered. "Everything from the past 6 months." "It's 11 at night, Ms. Harper." "Then you have until morning to get them to me." She heard him sigh, accepting the inevitable. "What exactly am I looking for?" "Discrepancies, usage that doesn't match occupancy patterns, systems running when they shouldn't be." "That's a pretty broad—" "Tom, the janitor noticed something. I want to know what." There was a long pause. "You're taking operational cues from the night cleaning staff now?" "I'm taking cues from someone who pays attention when everyone else is looking the other way. There's a difference." The reports arrived at 7 a.m., delivered by a bleary-eyed Tom who had clearly been up all night compiling data. Evelyn spread them across her desk, comparing power usage against occupancy schedules, against work orders, against the building's automated systems. At first, nothing looked unusual. Normal fluctuations. Expected variance, the kind of minor discrepancies that existed in any large building. But then she noticed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, between midnight and 4 a.m., power usage on floors 48 through 51 spiked by nearly 30%. Not enough to trigger alarms, not enough to seem suspicious if you weren't looking for it, but consistent, regular, deliberate. "What's on those floors?" she asked Tom. 48 is mostly storage and auxiliary server space. 49 and 50 are being renovated for the post-merger expansion. 51 is mechanical and building systems. Who has access? During the day, construction crews for the renovation. At night, just security and maintenance. And what would cause a 30% power spike? Tom frowned, studying the reports. Running some kind of equipment? Heavy processing? Climate control for something temperature sensitive? I'd need to do a physical inspection to know for sure. Then do one. Ms. Harper, I appreciate your concern, but a janitor noticing some lights on doesn't necessarily mean... It's not about the lights, Tom. It's about someone caring enough to notice what everyone else ignores. When was the last time anyone on our executive team walked those floors? When was the last time anyone asked why systems were running in supposedly empty spaces? Tom had no answer. Schedule the inspection for tonight, Evelyn said, after hours. I want to know what's happening in my building when everyone thinks no one's watching. At 11 p.m. that night, Evelyn stood in the lobby of the 48th floor with Tom and two building engineers. She was dressed casually for the first time in years. Jeans, a sweater, practical shoes. No corporate armor, just a woman who wanted to understand the truth. Let's start with the server room, Tom said, leading them down the hall. The auxiliary server space was supposed to be in minimal operation mode. Basic systems, backup storage, equipment that ran quietly in the background supporting the more critical systems upstairs. But when they opened the door, the temperature hit them like a wave. That's not normal, one of the engineers said immediately. The room was significantly warmer than it should have been. Not dangerously hot, but working hard hot. The engineers moved quickly to the monitoring stations, pulling up system data, checking loads and processes. Someone's running distributed processing, the lead engineer said, her voice tight. Heavy computation across multiple systems. This isn't backup storage, this is active work. What kind of work? Evelyn asked. I'd need to dig into the code to know for sure, but based on the resource allocation. Modeling, maybe? Simulation? Something that requires serious processing power. Tom was already on his phone pulling up access logs. According to the system, nobody's been in this room for 3 weeks. Last authorized entry was a routine maintenance check. Then someone has unauthorized access, Evelyn said quietly. They moved through the floors methodically. 49 revealed construction areas that looked normal. Renovation in progress, tools secured, materials staged properly. But in the back corner, behind a wall of plastic sheeting marked for demolition, they found another space that shouldn't exist. It was small, maybe 12 by 12, and it had been converted into a makeshift office. Desk, computer equipment, a small refrigerator, a cot. Someone had been working here. Living here, maybe. Check the computer, Evelyn said. The engineer booted up the system while Tom searched the desk. What they found made Evelyn's blood run cold. Financial models, projection documents, merger analysis for the Titan acquisition, but not the official versions. These were different. Altered numbers, modified projections, adjusted risk assessments. Someone had been creating a parallel set of documentation. This is fraud, Tom said flatly. Someone's cooking the books on the merger. Evelyn picked up a folder from the desk. Inside were internal memos, confidential communications, strategic planning documents that should have been secured behind multiple layers of corporate security. Someone had access to everything, had been collecting intelligence for months. Pull the security footage, she said. I want to know who's been on these floors. While Tom coordinated with security, Evelyn stood in the hidden office and felt the careful architecture of her merger beginning to collapse. Titan Industries was a publicly traded company. If these altered projections went public, if someone had been manipulating the data that both boards had relied on to approve the deal, the legal consequences would be catastrophic. But worse than that, far worse, was the realization that someone inside Harper Industries, someone she trusted, was orchestrating this deception. Ms. Harper, Tom's voice was strained. You need to see this. She joined him at the security station they'd set up in the hallway. The footage showed a familiar figure entering the hidden office at various times over the past 6 months. David Morrison, her head of financial operations, the man who had helped structure the Titan deal, the man who had access to every confidential document related to the merger. "Pull up everything on Morrison," Evelyn said, her voice ice cold. "Bank records, communications, travel history, everything." As Tom worked, Evelyn walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, Noah Brooks was probably cleaning another building, making another quiet promise to protect people from cold and loneliness. A janitor who noticed things, who cared about systems running in empty spaces, while up here, the executives who were supposed to be watching had missed everything. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Chen, asking about final merger preparations. Evelyn stared at the message for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. She called an emergency board meeting for the next morning. At 6 a.m., Evelyn stood in the main boardroom facing 17 people who controlled the future of Harper Industries. She had spent the night gathering evidence, building her case, preparing for the fight of her career. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Someone has been manipulating the Titan merger from the inside." The room erupted. Questions, denials, demands for proof. Evelyn let them react, then presented everything: the hidden office, the altered documents, the security footage, the financial trail that showed David Morrison receiving payments from a shell company connected to Titan's primary competitor. "Morrison has been feeding confidential information to Vanguard Holdings," she explained. "They're planning to launch a hostile takeover of Titan the moment our merger goes public. The altered projections would have made Titan appear more valuable than it actually is, inflating our purchase price and weakening our position when Vanguard strikes." "How did you discover this?" asked Robert Chen, the board chairman. Evelyn paused, considering how to answer. A janitor noticed that systems were running in empty spaces. He asked questions. "I decided to find out why." The room went silent. "A janitor," Robert repeated slowly. "Yes. While we were focused on quarterly projections and shareholder value, someone who actually works in this building, who sees it every day, noticed something wrong. And instead of ignoring it, instead of deciding it wasn't his concern, he kept paying attention." "Where's Morrison now?" someone asked. "Security is bringing him in as we speak." The door opened. David Morrison entered, flanked by 2 security officers. He was perfectly composed, his suit immaculate, his expression confident. He looked at Evelyn with something close to pity. "Really, Evelyn? This is what you're going with? Conspiracy theories from the cleaning staff?" "Sit down, David." "I don't think so. You're making accusations you can't possibly prove. You think finding some old files in a construction zone is evidence? You think—" "We have your communications with Vanguard Holdings," Evelyn said quietly. "We have financial records showing payments to your offshore accounts. We have security footage of you accessing confidential systems. We have everything, David. The only question now is whether you cooperate with the internal investigation or whether we hand everything directly to the federal prosecutors." Morrison's confidence cracked, just slightly, just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. He looked around the boardroom, measuring his options, and apparently decided that defiance would serve him better than confession. "You're destroying a $3 billion deal based on paranoia," he said. "The board won't support this." "The board will support the truth," Robert Chen said firmly, "even when it's expensive." "Especially when it's expensive," Evelyn added, "because that's what integrity costs. That's what honest leadership requires. And if we're not willing to pay that price, we don't deserve to be in this room." She looked at Morrison with something close to sadness. "I trusted you. We all did. And you were willing to burn down everything we built for money. You have no idea what you're walking away from," Morrison said. "Titan is worth the investment. Even with Vanguard's interference, even with the complications, the long-term value is meaningless if it's built on fraud," Evelyn interrupted. "We're done here. Security, please escort Mr. Morrison out. Tom, contact our legal counsel. I want a full forensic audit started immediately." As Morrison was led away, still protesting, the board members sat in stunned silence. Finally, Robert spoke. "What happens to the merger?" "We kill it," Evelyn said. "Publicly, immediately, with full disclosure about why. We take the hit to our stock price. We accept the consequences. And we rebuild with the truth. That's going to cost us billions." Yes. Shareholders are going to revolt. Probably. You could lose your job over this. Evelyn smiled grimly. Then I lose my job. But I won't lose the ability to look at myself in the mirror, and I won't build this company's future on lies, no matter how profitable they might be. The vote was close, 10-7, with Robert casting the deciding vote in Evelyn's favor. By noon, the merger cancellation was public. By evening, Harper Industries stock had dropped 18%. By midnight, Evelyn had received calls from 3 major shareholders demanding her resignation. She ignored them all and went to find the janitor who had saved her company. But Noah was cleaning the executive bathroom on the 32nd floor when Evelyn found him at 1 a.m. He looked up, surprised, and she saw him recognize her for the first time, not as a sleeping figure in a conference room, but as the person who actually ran this building. "Ms. Harper," he said, straightening. "Is something wrong? I need to thank you," Evelyn said, "and I need to understand something." She held out his jackets, the denim one and the hoodie, both cleaned and carefully folded. "You left these with me. Twice." Noah's face went still. "I didn't know you were awake." "I wasn't asleep either time. I was testing you." He absorbed this without visible reaction, but something in his eyes shifted. "Testing me for what?" "To see who you are when you think no one's watching. To understand what kind of person makes a promise like the one you made." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Evelyn's voice was gentle. "You promised someone you'd never let anyone be alone in the cold again. You promised you'd keep people warm. And you've been keeping that promise every night, haven't you? Not just with jackets, with attention, with caring about the details everyone else ignores." Noah took the jacket slowly, his hands careful on the fabric. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "My wife died 3 years ago. Winter night, car accident on an icy road. She was alone, cold. And I wasn't there. I was working late, trying to earn overtime, trying to provide. And she died alone. I'm so sorry. I made a promise at her funeral, in front of my daughter, in front of everyone, that I would never let that happen again, that if I saw someone who needed warmth, who needed someone to notice them, I would be there, no matter what. That's why you asked about the power usage." Noah nodded. "Systems running in empty buildings mean someone's there. Someone's working late or living in places they shouldn't be, or doing things that require hiding, and I couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't walk past and pretend I didn't see. Not anymore." Evelyn felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked away for years beneath ambition and professional distance. "You saved this company. You know that, right? Your questions, your attention to what others missed, you uncovered a fraud that would have destroyed us." "I was just doing my job." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "You were doing far more than your job. You were keeping a promise. And because of that promise, because you chose to care when you could have chosen to look away, everything changed." They stood together in the quiet hallway, the CEO and the janitor, separated by every measure of corporate hierarchy, but connected by something deeper. The recognition of what it meant to truly see people, to actually notice when things were wrong, to choose truth over convenience. "I have a question for you," Evelyn said, "and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. If I asked you to help me make sure this never happens again, if I asked you to be part of the team that actually watches over this company, that pays attention to the details, that cares about what happens in the shadows, would you do it?" Noah looked at her steadily. "What exactly are you offering?" "Honestly, I don't know yet. But I know that the people I've been relying on to keep this company safe missed everything that mattered. And the person who noticed, who cared enough to ask questions, was someone everyone else treated as invisible. That needs to change. You need to not be invisible anymore. Ms. Harper, I'm a janitor. I don't have a degree. I don't have corporate experience. I have a 6-year-old daughter who needs me home every morning. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are. Someone who keeps promises, who notices things, who cares about people being left alone in the cold. Whatever shape that takes, whatever role makes sense, I need that quality in this company. Because right now we're very good at profit margins and very bad at seeing what's actually happening in our own building." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made Evelyn's throat tighten. My daughter drew a picture last week of the building where Daddy works. She drew it tall and shiny, with windows like stars. She said it looked like a place where important things happen, and I realized she thinks my work matters. Not because she understands what I do, but because she knows I care about doing it right. He met Evelyn's eyes. If I said yes to whatever you're proposing, it can't be about titles or offices or becoming someone different. It has to be about making sure that caring about doing things right actually means something here. That noticing when things are wrong is valued, not ignored. Can you promise that? Evelyn thought about the board meeting, about the billions of dollars she had just walked away from, about the shareholders calling for her resignation, about the cost of choosing truth over profit. I can promise to try, she said, and I can promise that I won't ask you to compromise what makes you who you are. The promise you made to your wife, that matters more than any corporate objective. And if we can build something here that honors that kind of promise, maybe we'll actually deserve the success we're chasing. Noah considered this. Then, slowly, he held out his hand. Then yes, I'll help, whatever that looks like. They shook hands there in the quiet hallway, sealing an agreement that neither of them fully understood yet, but both recognized as important, as necessary, as the beginning of something that might actually matter. When Noah left to continue his rounds, Evelyn stood alone in the corridor and felt the weight of what she had just done. She had exposed the fraud, had killed the merger, had probably destroyed her own career in the process. But she had also kept a different kind of promise, the one her father had taught her about knowing who people really were, about watching when others weren't watching, about understanding that true character revealed itself in small moments, in quiet choices, in the promises people kept when no one was forcing them to. The janitor who gave his jacket to strangers, the CEO who chose truth over billions. And somewhere between those two positions, maybe there was a way forward that actually meant something. The glass tower stood silent around her, waiting to see what happened next. The morning after their conversation, Evelyn arrived at her office to find a handwritten note slipped under her door. The paper was cheap, the kind that came from a corner bodega, and the handwriting was careful, practiced, like someone who had learned to write neatly because messy writing meant miscommunication on job sites. Ms. Harper, my daughter asked me last night why I came home smiling. I told her I met someone who thinks noticing things matters. She said that's what heroes do in her storybooks. I'm not a hero, but I'll do my best not to let you down. Noah Brooks. Evelyn read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. She had dismantled a $3 billion fraud in the past 24 hours, had watched her stock price plummet, had fielded angry calls from shareholders who thought she had lost her mind. But this note, written on cheap paper by a janitor who thought being noticed mattered, felt more valuable than any of it. Her assistant Jennifer appeared in the doorway looking worried. The Wall Street Journal is calling. Bloomberg wants a statement, and Mr. Chen needs to see you immediately. Tell them I'll release a statement this afternoon, and send Marcus in. Her CFO entered looking like he hadn't slept. Marcus Chen had worked with Evelyn for 8 years, had helped engineer the Titan deal from the beginning, and his expression now carried the weight of watching 18 months of work collapse overnight. The board is in chaos, he said without preamble. Half of them want your resignation. The other half want explanations for why you torpedoed the biggest deal in company history based on evidence from a janitor. The evidence was solid, Marcus. You saw it yourself. I saw altered documents in a construction zone and security footage that could be interpreted multiple ways. What I didn't see was enough justification for destroying shareholder value. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying the man who had been her closest ally for nearly a decade. You think I made the wrong call? I think you made an emotional call. I think you let one employee's suspicions override months of due diligence and professional analysis, and I think we're going to pay for it. We were already paying for it. We just didn't know the bill was coming. Marcus shook his head. Morrison's lawyer is claiming entrapment, says the hidden office was a personal workspace he used for legitimate analysis, says the payments from the shell company were consulting fees for unrelated projects, says we have no actual proof of fraud, just circumstantial evidence and assumptions. What about the communications with Vanguard? His lawyer claims they were exploratory discussions about potential future opportunities. Not illegal, not even unethical, unless you can prove active coordination to undermine our merger. Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. You've talked to his lawyer already? His lawyer called me this morning. Wanted to know if I'd be willing to testify that Morrison's analysis was within normal parameters of financial modeling. And what did you tell him? Marcus met her eyes. I told him I needed to review the evidence more carefully before making any statements, which is what you should have done before blowing up a $3 billion deal. The words hung between them like a challenge. Evelyn recognized the moment for what it was. Marcus choosing sides, measuring loyalties, deciding whether to stand with her or position himself for whatever came next. I need to know something, she said quietly. When you reviewed Morrison's analysis for the Titan deal, did anything seem unusual? Any numbers that didn't quite add up? Any projections that felt optimistic beyond what the data supported? Marcus hesitated, and in that hesitation, Evelyn saw the truth. He had noticed something, had chosen to overlook it because the deal was too important, the opportunity too valuable, the pressure to succeed too intense. There were some aggressive assumptions, he admitted finally, but nothing that fell outside acceptable modeling parameters, nothing that would have raised red flags in a standard review. But they raised flags for you. They raised questions, which I addressed with Morrison. He provided explanations. I accepted them. Because you wanted the deal to go through. Because I trusted him, Marcus said sharply. Because he's been with this company for 12 years and had never given me reason to doubt his integrity. Because second-guessing every analysis and assumption would paralyze us from making any decisions at all. Evelyn stood and walked to the window. Below, the city was waking up, coffee carts opening, commuters flooding the sidewalks, the ordinary machinery of daily life grinding forward, regardless of corporate drama playing out in glass towers. There's a difference between trust and willful blindness, she said. Morrison gave you answers that were convenient. That allowed you to keep moving forward without uncomfortable questions. And because those answers served our goals, you chose to accept them instead of digging deeper. And a janitor asking about power usage is somehow more credible than 12 years of proven performance? Yes, Evelyn said, turning to face him, because the janitor had nothing to gain from lying, no deal to close, no bonus to chase, no career advancement tied to telling me what I wanted to hear. He just noticed something wrong and couldn't ignore it. That's not naivety, Marcus. That's integrity. Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. What do you want from me, Evelyn? You want me to say you were right? That destroying billions in shareholder value was worth it because it made you feel morally superior? I want you to be honest about what you're really angry about. Is it that I made the wrong decision? Or is it that I made a decision you didn't have the courage to make yourself? The words hit their target. Marcus's face flushed, and Evelyn saw the defensive anger of someone confronting an uncomfortable truth about themselves. I have a responsibility to this company, he said tightly, to our employees, to our shareholders, to the thousands of people whose retirement funds and investments depend on us making smart decisions. And you just flushed that responsibility down the drain because a janitor made you feel guilty about not noticing details. No, Evelyn said. I honored that responsibility by refusing to build our future on fraud. And if you can't see the difference, if you honestly believe that protecting our stock price matters more than protecting the truth, then maybe you should be the one considering resignation. The office went silent. Marcus stared at her, and she could see him processing what she had just implied, that his position, his career, his place in this company was now conditional on choosing the right side of this fight. I've given you 8 years, he said finally. I've helped build everything we have. And now you're questioning my integrity because I won't blindly support a decision that could destroy us? I'm questioning your priorities. There's a difference. Marcus stood abruptly. I need to think about where I stand on this and what that means for my future here. Take all the time you need. But Marcus, Evelyn waited until he met her eyes. Whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can explain to yourself in 20 years. Make sure it's something that matters more than quarterly earnings. After he left, Evelyn stood alone in her office and felt the fragile coalition she had built beginning to fracture. Marcus wasn't wrong about the consequences. The stock price was still falling. Major investors were demanding answers. Her board was divided. And she had just alienated her closest executive ally over principles that probably seemed abstract and naive to everyone watching this unfold. Her phone buzzed. Tom Reeves, asking if she had time to discuss Noah Brooks's background check. "Come up now," she said. Tom arrived carrying a folder that looked thicker than a standard employment file. He set it on her desk with the careful neutrality of someone delivering news he wasn't sure how she would receive. "You wanted to know about Noah Brooks," he said. "So I dug deeper than the standard background check. Thought you should know what you're dealing with." Evelyn opened the folder. Inside were documents that painted a picture far more complex than she had expected. Noah's wife, Emma Brooks, had died in a car accident 3 years ago. That part she knew. What she hadn't known was that the accident happened because she was driving to the hospital where Noah was recovering from a construction site injury. He had fallen from scaffolding, broken his back, spent 3 months in rehabilitation learning to walk again. Emma had been coming to visit him when she hit black ice on a rural Maine highway and crashed into a tree. She died alone, in the cold, while Noah was unconscious from pain medication, unable to answer her final phone call. "He blamed himself," Tom said quietly. "According to the hospital records, when they told him what happened, he tried to leave against medical advice. Wanted to get to her. They had to sedate him." Evelyn read through police reports, medical files, witness statements, saw the shape of a tragedy that had broken a man and rebuilt him into someone who made promises to ghosts. "There's more," Tom continued. "After Emma died, Noah lost their house. Medical bills from his injury, funeral costs, no income while he recovered. He and his daughter ended up in a homeless shelter for 4 months. That's when he made the promise, apparently stood up during a group meeting at the shelter and announced that he would never let anyone suffer alone if he could prevent it. Started giving away his own meals to people who looked hungry, giving his coat to people who were cold. The shelter director's report says he was concerning, like he was trying to destroy himself through self-sacrifice." "But he didn't destroy himself," Evelyn said, still reading. "No, his daughter stopped him. According to social services notes, she told him that Mommy wouldn't want him to disappear too, that she needed him to stay, that promises meant staying alive to keep them." Evelyn found a photograph in the file. Noah and his daughter outside the shelter, both wearing donated clothes, both looking at the camera with expressions that tried to project strength, but couldn't quite hide the fear beneath. The girl's hand was clasped tightly in her father's, like she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. "He got work doing day labor," Tom continued. "Saved enough for a security deposit on the apartment in Queens. Eventually got steady maintenance work, then applied through the service company we contract with. Every reference I called said the same thing: reliable, honest, notices details that others miss. One supervisor said Noah once shut down an entire job site because he spotted a structural weakness no one else had seen. Probably saved lives. Cost the company 2 days of work, but they kept him on anyway because they knew he was right. And now he's cleaning floors in our building. Because it pays enough to support his daughter and the hours let him be home when she wakes up. He works 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. here, then picks her up from the neighbor who watches her overnight. Sleeps while she's at school. Spends afternoons and evenings being her father. Repeat every day." Evelyn closed the folder carefully. "You're telling me all this because you think I'm making a mistake getting him involved in company operations. I'm telling you this because you should know who you're trusting. Noah Brooks is a man who's been through hell and came out the other side with a promise that governs his entire life. That kind of conviction is either admirable or concerning, depending on how you look at it. Which way do you look at it?" Tom considered the question. "I look at it as someone who's going to be absolutely honest, even when honesty is inconvenient. Someone who's going to notice things you'd rather stay hidden. Someone who won't compromise his principles for money or advancement or pressure, which makes him either your greatest asset or your greatest liability. Only if we're afraid of the truth. Most companies are, Ms. Harper. Most people are. That's why they hire people who know when to look away." Evelyn thought about Marcus's anger, about Morrison's fraud, about the board members who valued stock prices over integrity. Tom wasn't wrong. Most organizations rewarded people who maintained comfortable illusions, who smoothed over complications, who prioritized harmony over honesty. "Set up a meeting," she said. "I want to talk to Noah properly, not in a hallway at 1 a.m. Somewhere his daughter can come too. I need to understand what this actually means to him before I ask him to be part of something bigger." "You're serious about this?" "Completely." Tom shook his head slowly. "You know this is going to make things worse with the board, right? They're already questioning your judgment, bringing a janitor into company operations, especially after using his observations to kill the Titan deal. They're going to see it as you doubling down on a mistake." "Let them see it however they want. I'm done making decisions based on what looks good in board meetings. I want to make decisions based on what's actually right." "Even if it costs you everything?" Evelyn met his eyes steadily. "Especially then." After Tom left, Evelyn spent the rest of the morning preparing her public statement about the merger cancellation. She drafted it herself, refused to let the PR team soften the language or bury the truth in corporate euphemisms. The statement was simple and direct. Harper Industries had discovered evidence of internal fraud related to the Titan acquisition. The merger had been canceled to protect shareholder interests and maintain corporate integrity. A full investigation was underway. The company was committed to transparency and accountability, regardless of short-term financial impact. She released it at noon. By 12:30, her phone was ringing off the hook. Bloomberg wanted details. The Journal wanted interviews. CNBC wanted her to appear on Squawk Box. Every business journalist in New York wanted to know who the CEO was who had just chosen principles over profit. Evelyn ignored them all and called the number Tom had provided for Noah Brooks. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. "Hello? Noah? It's Evelyn Harper. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "I'm at the park with my daughter. Can I call you back?" "Actually, I was hoping I could join you. If that's all right. I'd like to meet her." There was a long pause. "Ms. Harper, I don't think, please, not as your CEO, just as someone who wants to understand what the promise you made actually means to your life." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "We're at the playground on 43rd and 10th, the one with the blue climbing structure. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Evelyn took a car service to Queens, watching the city transform as they crossed the bridge. From glass towers to brick buildings, from corporate headquarters to corner bodegas, from the architecture of power to the infrastructure of ordinary life. The playground was crowded with afternoon activity, children shrieking with joy on slides and swings while parents clustered on benches comparing notes on schools and schedules and the endless logistics of raising kids in the city. She found Noah sitting on a bench near the climbing structure, watching a small girl with dark braids navigate the monkey bars with intense concentration. He stood when he saw Evelyn approaching, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Harper." "Evelyn, please, at least here." The little girl completed her crossing and ran over, flushed with accomplishment. "Daddy, did you see? I made it all the way across without stopping." "I saw, sweetheart. You were amazing." Noah's voice transformed when he talked to his daughter, the careful guardedness vanishing, replaced by warmth that made him seem younger, less burdened. Then he noticed Evelyn, and his expression shifted again, becoming protective. "Lily, this is Ms. Harper. She works at the building where Daddy cleans." Lily studied Evelyn with the frank curiosity of a 6-year-old. "You're really tall." "You're right, I am tall. Taller than Daddy. About the same, I think." "Do you wear high heels all the time? Mrs. Martinez at school says high heels hurt your feet, but they make you look important." Evelyn glanced down at her practical flats. "Not today. Today I wanted to be comfortable." "That's smart," Lily nodded approvingly. "Daddy says comfortable is better than fancy." "Your daddy sounds wise." "He is. He's the wisest person I know. He notices everything." Lily said it with absolute conviction, and Evelyn felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. This was what mattered to Noah, not corporate titles or recognition, but being wise and attentive in the eyes of a 6-year-old who had already lost so much. "Can I go on the swings?" Lily asked. "Sure, sweetheart. I'll be right here if you need me." They watched her run off, and Noah gestured to the bench. They sat together in the afternoon sunshine, surrounded by the sounds of playing children and parent conversations, and Evelyn felt profoundly aware of the distance between this moment and her usual world of board meetings and strategic planning. "You came all the way to Queens to meet my daughter," Noah said finally. "Why?" "Because I needed to understand what I'm asking when I ask you to get involved in fixing what's broken at Harper Industries. Your promise, the one you made to your wife, it's not abstract to you, it's your entire life. And I needed to see what that actually means." Noah watched Lily pumping her legs on the swing, building momentum, her braids flying. "It means I never make a decision without thinking about whether I could explain it to her, whether she'd still think I was wise, whether I'd still be the person she needs me to be." That's a high standard. It's the only standard that matters. Everything else, money, advancement, what other people think, it's all secondary to whether I'm keeping my promise. To Emma, to Lily, to myself. The promise to never let anyone suffer alone. The promise to notice when people need help, to care when it would be easier not to choose being present over being comfortable. He turned to look at her directly. "You asked me last night if I'd help make sure caring about doing things right actually means something at your company. But I need you to understand, I can't do that halfway. I can't notice some things and ignore others because they're inconvenient. I can't choose when to care based on what's politically safe. I'm not asking you to. You might be without realizing it. Corporate environments, they have ways of teaching people when to look away, when to accept explanations that don't quite make sense, when to prioritize smooth operations over uncomfortable truths. And if I get pulled into that world, if I start making those compromises, I become someone my daughter shouldn't admire. I break the promise that's the only thing holding me together." Evelyn heard the fear beneath his words, not of failure, but of corruption, of becoming someone who knew better but chose convenience anyway. It was the same fear she saw in the mirror every morning, the question that had driven her to test him in the first place. "What if I told you I'm afraid of the same thing?" she said quietly. "What if I admitted that every day in that building I make choices about what to notice and what to ignore? That I've built a career on knowing exactly how much truth people can handle before it becomes inconvenient? Then I'd say you're honest about it, which is more than most people. But not enough." "No," Noah agreed. "Not enough." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Lily swing higher and higher, fearless in a way that only children who felt absolutely secure could be. "My CFO thinks I'm making a mistake," Evelyn said, "getting you involved, using your observations to justify killing a $3 billion merger. He thinks I'm letting emotion override professional judgment." "Is he right?" "I don't know, maybe. But I know that the professional judgment that was supposed to protect us missed everything that actually mattered. And the person who noticed, who cared enough to ask questions that no one wanted to answer, was someone everyone else had decided was invisible." "I'm not invisible," Noah said. "I'm just doing a job most people consider beneath notice. There's a difference." "You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just understand that if you want me to help fix what's broken, it can't be about making me visible. It has to be about making truth visible, making the consequences of looking away visible, making the cost of choosing profit over people visible. That's what actually needs to change." Evelyn thought about Morrison's fraud, about Marcus's convenient acceptance of questionable analysis, about board members who measured success in stock prices rather than integrity. Noah was right. The problem wasn't that one person had been invisible. The problem was that the truth had been invisible, and everyone had preferred it that way. "I'm going to lose my job over this," she said. "The board is already calling for my resignation. Shareholders are furious, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better." "Then why are you doing it?" "Because I can't look at myself in the mirror if I don't. Because I'd rather lose everything than build success on fraud. Because—" She stopped, surprised by what she was about to say, but continued anyway. "Because I tested you to see if you'd keep a promise when no one was watching. And then I realized I was testing myself too, seeing if I'd keep mine." "What promise did you make?" "To my father. When he died, I promised I'd run this company the way he built it, with integrity that mattered more than profit. And I've been compromising that promise for years, telling myself that you have to be practical, that you have to accept reality, that you can't let principles paralyze progress. But watching you keep your promise, even when it cost you everything, even when no one would have blamed you for giving up, it made me realize I'd been breaking mine. Noah didn't respond immediately. He watched his daughter jump off the swing mid-arc, land confidently, and run toward the slide. When he finally spoke, his voice carried understanding rather than judgment. Promises are easy to make and hard to keep, especially when keeping them means losing things you worked hard to build. How do you do it? How do you keep going when everything falls apart? He pointed to Lily, now climbing the slide ladder with determined focus. Because she's watching. Because if I give up, if I compromise, if I choose comfort over conviction, she learns that promises don't matter, that you only keep them when they're convenient, and I can't teach her that. I can't be the person who shows her that giving up is acceptable. Even when keeping the promise costs you everything? Especially then, that's when it matters most. Evelyn felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She hadn't cried in years, not at her father's funeral, not during brutal board battles, not when her own marriage had collapsed under the weight of competing ambitions. But sitting on a playground bench in Queens, listening to a janitor explain why promises mattered more than survival, she felt something breaking open inside her. I want to create a new position, she said. Internal oversight. Someone whose job is to notice what everyone else misses, to ask questions that make people uncomfortable, to keep us honest when it would be easier to look away. And I want you to fill it. Noah turned to look at her fully. That's not a real position. That's setting me up to fail. It's only setting you up to fail if I don't support it. If I don't make it clear that your job is to find problems, not hide them. That your value comes from making us face uncomfortable truths, not from maintaining comfortable illusions. The board will never approve it. I'll make them approve it, or I'll resign and make it a condition of whoever replaces me. Ms. Harper, Evelyn. Evelyn, you don't have to destroy your career to prove a point. You can find someone with credentials, with experience, with the ability to be ignored when convenient, with the willingness to compromise when pressured, with the corporate socialization that teaches them when to stop asking questions. She shook her head. I need someone who can't be convinced that fraud is acceptable, who won't accept explanations that don't make sense just because they come from someone important, who will keep noticing things even when everyone wishes they wouldn't. That's going to make me unpopular, extremely. People are going to resent me, call me paranoid, say I'm overstepping. Almost certainly. And when that happens, when the pressure builds and people start demanding I be fired or reassigned or somehow neutralized, will you still support what I'm doing? It was the essential question, the one that would determine whether this worked or became just another failed experiment in corporate idealism. Evelyn thought about Marcus's anger, about the board's division, about shareholders who measured her worth in quarterly earnings. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, she said honestly, or that I won't sometimes wish you'd found less inconvenient truths. But I can promise that I'll try, that I'll remember why I created this position, that I'll choose supporting honesty over protecting comfort, even when it costs me. That's not very reassuring. It's the most honest answer I can give. Anything else would be a lie we'd both regret later. Noah smiled slightly, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Fair enough. Lily ran over, breathless and happy. Daddy, can we get ice cream, please? Noah checked his watch. It's almost dinner time, sweetheart. But I was really good at the monkey bars, and I didn't cry when I scraped my knee last Tuesday. Those are both true. What do you think, Ms. Harper? Does monkey bar excellence and brave knee scraping earn ice cream before dinner? Evelyn found herself smiling. I think it absolutely does. They walked to a corner shop that sold ice cream and empanadas, Lily between them holding both their hands, chattering about her teacher and her friends, and a book about butterflies she was reading. It was achingly normal, achingly ordinary, and Evelyn couldn't remember the last time she'd done something this simple. When Lily got her ice cream, chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, she looked up at Evelyn with serious eyes. Are you Daddy's boss? Sort of. We work in the same building. Is he in trouble? Is that why you came to the park? No, sweetheart, Noah said quickly. Miss Harper just wanted to talk about work things. Good. Because Daddy's the best at his job. He never misses anything. He even noticed when Mrs. Chen from downstairs was sad and brought her soup. Your daddy notices a lot of things, Evelyn agreed. That's because of the promise, the one he made to Mommy, that he'd pay attention and help people who need help. Lily said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Daddy says promises are the most important thing, more important than anything. He's right. Do you keep your promises? The question, asked with a child's directness, hit harder than any board member's challenge. Evelyn thought about her father, about the company he'd built, about the compromises she'd made and justified and rationalized over the years. I try to, she said, but sometimes I forget how important they are. Sometimes I need people like your daddy to remind me. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Daddy's good at reminding people about important things. That's why he's wise. They finished their ice cream sitting on a bench outside the shop, watching the neighborhood move through its evening rhythm. Eventually Noah stood, lifting Lily into his arms, even though she was probably too big to be carried. We should head home. It's almost bedtime. Thank you for letting me meet you both, Evelyn said. Thank you for the ice cream, Lily said sleepily, already resting her head on her father's shoulder. Noah met Evelyn's eyes over his daughter's head. When do you want to talk about this officially? About the position? Tomorrow. Come to my office at 9 a.m. Bring Lily if you can't find childcare. We'll figure something out. She has school. Then come after you drop her off. This matters more than normal business hours. Noah nodded slowly. All right, but I need you to know, if I do this, if I take on trying to keep your company honest, I'm going to find things you don't want to know. I'm going to ask questions that make powerful people angry, and I'm not going to stop just because it becomes inconvenient. I'm counting on it. Even if it means finding out that more people besides Morrison were involved, even if it means discovering that the problems go deeper than one rogue executive. Especially then. They stood facing each other on a street corner in Queens, the CEO and the janitor, making a commitment that both knew would probably end badly, but felt necessary anyway. Sometimes the right choice wasn't the safe choice. Sometimes keeping promises meant accepting consequences you couldn't predict. I'll see you tomorrow, Noah said finally. Tomorrow, Evelyn agreed. She watched them walk away, Noah carrying his daughter, both of them silhouetted against the evening light. Then she called her car service and headed back to Manhattan, back to her glass tower, back to the mess she had created and the promises she was trying to keep. Her phone rang during the ride. Robert Chen, the board chairman. We need to talk, he said without preamble, about your statement today, about the direction you're taking this company, about whether you're still the right person to lead us. I'm listening? Not on the phone. Come to my office tonight, 8 p.m. And Evelyn, bring answers that make sense, because right now you're asking us to trust judgment that looks increasingly like career suicide. The call ended. Evelyn stared out at the city lights, at the millions of people living millions of lives she would never know, and wondered if Noah was right, if keeping promises really was more important than survival, if truth really mattered more than success. Her father would have said yes, would have told her that integrity was the only thing you took with you when everything else burned down. But her father had died before he had to face shareholders demanding his resignation, before he had to choose between principles and pragmatism on a scale that affected thousands of employees and billions in market value. Tomorrow she would meet with Noah officially, would create a position that would probably accelerate her own downfall, would choose honesty over safety one more time. Tonight she had to convince the board that destroying a merger to expose fraud was leadership, not madness. The car pulled up to the building where Robert Chen kept his private office. Evelyn stepped out into the night, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward whatever came next. Some promises were worth keeping, even when you couldn't see the ending, even when the costs kept rising, even when everyone around you said you were making a terrible mistake. She just had to hope Noah was right about that mattering in the end. Robert Chen's office occupied the top floor of a building older than Harper Industries itself, all dark wood and leather furniture that spoke of inherited wealth rather than earned success. He was waiting when Evelyn arrived, standing by the window with a glass of scotch in his hand, his expression unreadable. You're late, he said without turning. Traffic. Or you were hoping I'd change my mind about this conversation? Evelyn closed the door behind her. Would you have? Robert finally turned to face her. He was 73, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from 4 decades of board service across a dozen major corporations. He had been her father's friend, had voted for her appointment as CEO, and had supported every major decision she'd made for 5 years. Until now. Sit down, Evelyn. She remained standing. I'd rather hear what you have to say first. What I have to say is that you're destroying everything your father built, and I need to understand why before I decide whether to support removing you as CEO. The words were blunt, designed to shock, to force a defensive reaction. Evelyn recognized the tactic because she'd used it herself in negotiations. Stay calm, she told herself. Stay focused on what matters. My father built this company on integrity, she said quietly, on the principle that short-term profit didn't justify long-term corruption. And if you think exposing Morrison's fraud betrays that legacy, then you didn't know him as well as you thought. Don't lecture me about your father. I knew him before you were born. I was there when he mortgaged his house to keep this company alive during the recession. I watched him make hard choices that you can't even imagine. Then you know he would have killed the Titan deal the moment he discovered the fraud. Would he? Robert's voice carried genuine challenge now. Or would he have found a way to salvage it, to protect the thousands of jobs that depend on this company's success, to balance principle with pragmatism instead of choosing ideological purity at everyone else's expense? There was no way to salvage it, not without becoming complicit in Morrison's scheme. So you claim, but all you have is circumstantial evidence and the observations of a janitor who asked about power usage. That's not enough to justify destroying billions in shareholder value. Evelyn had known this argument was coming, had prepared for it during the car ride over, but hearing it from Robert, from someone who should understand what was at stake, made her realize how isolated she had become. The evidence was solid, she said, the altered documents, the shell company payments, the communications with Vanguard, all of which Morrison's lawyers are contesting, all of which could have alternate explanations. You didn't wait for a full investigation. You didn't give him a chance to defend himself. You just pulled the trigger on a multi-billion-dollar deal based on your gut feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't a gut feeling. It was a pattern of deception that you wanted to find, Robert interrupted. Be honest, Evelyn. You were looking for a reason to kill that merger, and the moment someone gave you an excuse, even a flimsy one, you took it. The accusation hit harder than she expected. Was there truth in it? Had she been looking for justification to walk away from a deal that had always made her vaguely uncomfortable, from projections that seemed too optimistic, from success that felt slightly hollow? What I wanted doesn't matter, she said carefully. What matters is that Morrison was cooking the books, and we caught him before the fraud went public. If it was fraud, if his analysis was actually deceptive rather than just aggressive, if you're right about all of this instead of wrong, Robert set down his glass with deliberate precision. The board voted 10-7 in your favor. That's not a mandate, Evelyn. That's a warning. Half the room thinks you made a catastrophic mistake. And if Morrison's lawyers prove his innocence, if the investigation shows you overreacted, that 7 becomes 0 very quickly. Then I'll resign, but I won't apologize for choosing truth over profit. You keep saying that like it's some noble principle, but truth without wisdom is just self-righteousness. And right now, you're asking thousands of employees to pay the price for your moral clarity. Evelyn felt her temper flare but forced it down. Getting angry would only prove Robert's point about her judgment being compromised. What do you want from me? An apology? A promise to be more cautious? A commitment to prioritize shareholder value over everything else? I want you to explain why a janitor's observations matter more than 18 months of professional due diligence. I want you to justify creating a new oversight position for someone with no corporate experience. I want you to convince me that you haven't completely lost perspective on what actually matters. Noah Brooks noticed things that everyone else missed because he wasn't invested in ignoring them. He had no career advancement tied to the merger succeeding, no bonus dependent on closing the deal, no reason to accept convenient explanations instead of asking uncomfortable questions. That made him more reliable than every executive who had motivation to overlook problems. Or it made him paranoid, seeing conspiracies in normal business operations because he doesn't understand how corporations actually function. He understood enough to spot fraud that fooled your professional analysts. Allegedly spotted, allegedly fraud. You're treating assumptions as facts, Evelyn, and that's dangerous leadership. They stared at each other across the expensive office, and Evelyn realized that this conversation was really about something deeper than the Titan merger. It was about two different philosophies of corporate governance colliding: Robert's pragmatic acceptance that business required compromises, and her growing conviction that some compromises corrupted everything they touched. "My father told me something before he died," she said quietly. "He said that the hardest part of leadership wasn't making tough decisions. It was living with them afterward. Looking at yourself in the mirror and knowing you chose what was right instead of what was easy. And he said that the moment you stop being able to do that, the moment you choose comfort over conviction, you should resign, because you've stopped leading and started managing decline. Your father also understood that conviction without results is just stubbornness, that principles that bankrupt the company aren't actually principled, they're self-indulgent. Is that what you think this is? Self-indulgence?" Robert sighed, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked old, tired. "I think you're a brilliant executive who's having a crisis of faith in what you've built. I think meeting one person who lives by absolute principles made you question your own compromises. And I think you're overcompensating, trying to prove to yourself that you still have integrity by making dramatic gestures that feel meaningful but might be destructive." The analysis was uncomfortably accurate. Evelyn felt exposed, like Robert had looked past her carefully maintained facade and seen the doubt beneath. But acknowledging that doubt would give him ammunition to push for her resignation, to argue that she was unfit to lead. "Even if you're right about my motivations," she said, "that doesn't make me wrong about Morrison, about the fraud, about the need for better oversight. No, but it makes me question whether you're making decisions based on what's best for the company or what makes you feel better about yourself." Before Evelyn could respond, Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted, surprise mixed with something that might have been alarm. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "Tom Reeves. Says there's a situation at Harper Tower, emergency on floor 51. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Floor 51 was building mechanicals, the same area where Noah had noticed unusual power consumption. She pulled out her own phone and found 3 missed calls from Tom, all in the past 5 minutes. She called him back immediately. "Tom, what's happening?" "Fire alarm on 51. Smoke reported in the mechanical room. Fire department is on the way. We're evacuating the building as a precaution." "Is anyone hurt?" "Not that we know of, but Ms. Harper..." Tom's voice dropped lower. "The fire started in the section where we found Morrison's hidden office, and security cameras show someone entering that area about 20 minutes ago." "Who?" "We can't tell from the footage. They knew where the camera blind spots were. But whoever it is, they're still in there. The mechanical room is locked from the inside." Evelyn was already moving toward the door. "I'm coming now. Ms. Harper, you should let the fire department handle this. If someone's destroying evidence, I'm coming now," she repeated, and ended the call. Robert followed her to the elevator. "I'm coming with you." "Robert, you don't need to..." "If there's a fire in the same area where you found evidence of fraud, that's not coincidence. That's someone covering their tracks. And if you're right about Morrison, if this proves the conspiracy goes deeper, then I need to see it myself." They made the drive to Harper Tower in tense silence, Evelyn's mind racing through possibilities. Morrison was in custody, his access to the building revoked. But he could have partners, could have warned someone that the fraud had been discovered, could have triggered a desperate attempt to destroy evidence before the investigation went further. The street outside Harper Tower was chaos when they arrived. Fire trucks, police cars, crowds of evacuated employees standing on the sidewalk in clusters. Evelyn pushed through them, showing her ID to the fire chief in command. "We need to get into the mechanical room on 51, she said. "Not until we clear the smoke and determine what's burning. Could be electrical, could be chemical, could be someone set a trash fire. Won't know until we get inside. Someone's locked in there, someone who might be destroying evidence of corporate fraud." The fire chief raised an eyebrow. "That changes things. But we still do this my way. My people go in first, assess the situation, secure any persons inside. Then you can have your evidence. Understood?" Evelyn nodded reluctantly. She watched the firefighters enter the building in full gear, watched the smoke billowing from ventilation systems, and felt a growing dread that whoever was inside knew exactly what they were doing. 20 minutes later, the radio crackled. "Chief, we've got the fire contained. Small electrical fire, deliberately set, and we've got a male subject in here. He's not responding to commands. Appears to be trying to access computer equipment. Can you identify him?" "Negative. He's wearing a mask, but he's not leaving without a fight." Evelyn felt Robert's hand on her shoulder. Let the professionals handle this. But she couldn't. Couldn't stand outside while someone destroyed evidence that might prove the fraud went deeper than Morrison. Couldn't wait passively while the truth burned. She found Tom Reeves near the building entrance. "Get me protective equipment. I'm going up." "Ms. Harper, that's not—" "Get me the equipment, Tom. Now." 5 minutes later, she was ascending in a freight elevator with 2 firefighters, wearing a borrowed helmet and breathing apparatus that felt claustrophobic and awkward. Robert had tried to follow, but she'd refused. At least one board member needed to survive if this went badly. The 51st floor was thick with smoke despite the ventilation efforts. The firefighters led her through the haze to the mechanical room where more crew members were working to pry open the locked door. "Stand back," the fire chief ordered. "We're going to force entry." The door gave way with a crack of splintering wood. Inside, through the clearing smoke, Evelyn saw someone hunched over computer equipment, frantically disconnecting drives and smashing hardware. The figure turned when they entered, and even through the mask, Evelyn recognized the build, the stance, the way he moved. "Marcus?" Her CFO stood frozen for a moment, holding a hard drive in one hand and a hammer in the other. Then he dropped both and pulled off his mask, his face streaked with soot and resignation. "I told Morrison this was a mistake," he said quietly. "Told him burning evidence would only make things worse. But he was convinced you'd find the connection to me, that you'd discover I knew about the altered projections all along." Evelyn felt the world tilt. Not just Morrison. Marcus, too. Her CFO. Her closest ally for 8 years. The man who had helped build the Titan deal from the beginning. "You knew," she said, her voice barely audible through the breathing apparatus. "You knew Morrison was manipulating the data, and you let it happen." "I didn't just let it happen, I helped design the scheme." Marcus's confession came out in a rush, like he'd been holding it back for months and finally had permission to release it. The altered projections, the optimistic forecasts, the financial models that made Titan look more valuable than it was. I created the methodology Morrison used, and I looked the other way when he took it further than we'd originally planned. Why? Because the deal was too important. Because our stock price needed the boost, because I convinced myself that aggressive projections weren't the same as fraud, that everyone in M&A games the numbers to some degree, that what we were doing was just business as usual. It wasn't business as usual, it was criminal fraud. I know that now, but at the time I told myself it was necessary, that the ends justified the means, that you were too idealistic to understand what it takes to compete in this industry. Marcus laughed bitterly. And then a janitor asked about power consumption and everything unraveled because he couldn't rationalize away the inconsistencies like I'd learned to do. The firefighters had moved in to secure the damaged equipment, cataloging what could be salvaged. Evelyn watched them work, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. 8 years of collaboration, 8 years of trust, all built on a foundation that had been rotting from the beginning. "Morrison's lawyers contacted you," she said, pieces clicking together. "That's why you were so angry this morning, not because you thought I was wrong about the fraud, but because you knew I was right. And you knew the investigation would eventually lead to you." "I thought I had time, thought I could clean up the evidence, make it look like Morrison acted alone. But you moved too fast, created too much scrutiny, and now—" He gestured at the burning equipment. "Now it's over." Robert Chen appeared in the doorway, having ignored Evelyn's orders to stay downstairs. He took in the scene, the destroyed computers, Marcus's confession written across his soot-stained face, and something hardened in his expression. "How many others?" Robert asked. "How deep does this go?" "It's just Morrison and me," Marcus said. "We kept it contained. Didn't involve anyone who might develop a conscience and talk." But you involved enough people to execute the scheme. Shell companies don't create themselves. Vanguard doesn't coordinate hostile takeovers with random individuals. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made Evelyn's blood run cold. There are 3 more people involved. 2 in our accounting department who helped hide the payments, and 1 in Titan's leadership who was feeding us inside information about their vulnerabilities. Names, Robert demanded. I want immunity first, protection from prosecution in exchange for full cooperation. You're not in a position to negotiate. I'm in the only position to prove the full extent of the conspiracy. Without my testimony, you have circumstantial evidence and assumptions. With it, you can clean house completely. Your choice. Evelyn stepped forward, pulling off her helmet. Give us the names, Marcus. Don't make this worse than it already is. It can't get worse. My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. I'll probably face criminal charges regardless of what deals I make. So yes, I want immunity. I want protection. I want something in exchange for burning down everyone else who was involved. You want to save yourself by betraying your co-conspirators, Robert said coldly. I want to be the one who cooperates instead of the one who holds out until the end. Morrison's already looking for a deal. Whoever talks first gets the best terms. That's how these things work. Evelyn looked at the man she had trusted for 8 years and felt nothing but exhaustion. No anger, no betrayal, just a deep weariness at how easily people justified corruption when it served their interests. Tom, she said to her head of security, who had followed Robert upstairs, call our legal counsel and contact the federal prosecutors. We're going to need immunity agreements and cooperation deals. Ms. Harper, you should clear this with the board before the board can object later. Right now, we're stopping this from spreading further. She turned back to Marcus. You'll give us everything, every name, every transaction, every conversation that proves the conspiracy. And then you'll testify when the time comes. Those are the terms. And in exchange, we advocate for leniency. We don't promise immunity because that's not our decision to make. But we tell the prosecutors you cooperated fully, that you helped expose the full scope of the fraud. That's the best you're going to get. Marcus studied her face, looking for weakness, for room to negotiate. He must have seen something that convinced him she meant it, because he nodded slowly. All right, but I want to make a statement first, on the record, before I start naming names. What kind of statement? That I'm sorry, that I knew better, that I convinced myself the ends justified the means, and I was wrong. He looked directly at Evelyn. And that you were right to kill the merger. That listening to someone who still believed in absolute principles saved this company from something far worse than a destroyed deal. The apology felt hollow, self-serving, like Marcus was already positioning himself for the public relations battle ahead. But Evelyn recognized that even hollow apologies sometimes contained truth. Marcus had convinced himself that corruption was acceptable, had rationalized fraud as necessary, and Noah's stubborn insistence on noticing what was wrong had exposed that rationalization for the lie it was. Come on, she said. Let's get you downstairs and start the process of fixing this mess. They rode down in the freight elevator together. Evelyn, Marcus, Robert, Tom, and 2 firefighters who looked deeply uncomfortable with the corporate drama unfolding around them. Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavy with everything that had been said and everything that still needed to be addressed. In the lobby, they found Noah Brooks standing near the entrance, still in his janitor's uniform, watching the chaos with an expression of quiet concern. He spotted Evelyn and moved toward her immediately. Are you all right? Tom said there was a fire in the mechanical room. I'm fine, but we found more than a fire. She glanced at Marcus, who was being led away by Tom in building security. The fraud went deeper than we thought. Morrison had help. Noah followed her gaze, understanding dawning on his face. Your CFO? Yes. I'm sorry. Don't be. You tried to warn me, asked about systems running in empty spaces, noticed inconsistencies that everyone else ignored. If I'd listened sooner, maybe you listened when it mattered, Noah interrupted gently. That's what counts. Robert cleared his throat. Mr. Brooks, I believe I owe you an apology. And my thanks. Noah looked surprised. Sir? I questioned Evelyn's judgment in taking your observations seriously, suggested she was being naive, letting emotion override professional analysis. But you were right about the power consumption, about something being wrong in this building. And because of that, we caught a conspiracy that would have destroyed far more than one merger. I just noticed things that seemed off. Anyone could have, but no one else did, Robert said firmly. And that matters. It matters that you cared enough to ask questions. It matters that you didn't accept convenient explanations. It matters that you kept a promise to pay attention when everyone else had learned to look away. Noah glanced at Evelyn, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. She gave him a slight nod of encouragement. I appreciate that, sir. But the real credit goes to Ms. Harper for actually investigating, for choosing to believe that the details mattered. Most executives would have dismissed my concerns as irrelevant. Most executives would have been wrong, Robert said. He turned to Evelyn. I came here tonight ready to support your removal as CEO, ready to tell the board that you'd lost perspective, that you were making decisions based on idealism rather than reality. But what happened here? Finding Marcus trying to destroy evidence, exposing a conspiracy that went deeper than Morrison, that changes the calculation. Does it change your vote? Evelyn asked. It makes me question whether I've been the one who lost perspective, whether I've spent so long accepting that business requires compromise that I forgot some things shouldn't be compromised. He looked old again, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Your father would be proud of what you did, even if it cost you everything, even if the shareholders revolt and the stock price never recovers, he'd be proud that you chose truth over profit. That means more than you know, Robert, but it doesn't solve your problems. The board is still divided, shareholders are still furious, and exposing Marcus just proves that the rot goes deeper than anyone wanted to admit. You're going to face serious pressure to resign before this investigation concludes. I know. So what are you going to do? Evelyn looked around the lobby, at the evacuated employees, at the fire crews packing their equipment, at Noah standing quietly nearby, still in his uniform that marked him as someone most people never noticed. She thought about promises kept and broken, about the cost of integrity, about what her father would have done in her position. I'm going to keep fighting, she said. I'm going to see this investigation through. I'm going to make sure everyone involved faces consequences. And I'm going to create the oversight position I promised Noah, regardless of whether the board approves it or whether I'm still CEO when it's formalized. That's likely professional suicide. Probably, but it's also keeping my promise. And I'd rather lose everything keeping promises than succeed by breaking them. Robert studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Then you'll have my support, for whatever it's worth in the battle ahead. They shook hands, and Evelyn felt something shift in the careful political calculations that governed corporate life. Not victory. She was too realistic to believe one board member's support would be enough. But at least she wouldn't face the fight alone. The fire chief approached to give the all-clear for re-entry. The employees began filtering back into the building, murmuring about the excitement, about fires and evacuations, and the rumors already spreading about corporate drama on the 51st floor. Noah caught Evelyn's eye and tilted his head toward a quieter corner of the lobby. She followed him, grateful for a moment away from Robert's intensity and the chaos of the evening. You found what you were looking for, Noah said. It wasn't a question. Yes, though I wish I hadn't. Marcus was someone I trusted completely. Finding out he'd been lying for years. She stopped, not sure how to articulate the sense of betrayal. Hurts worse than if it had been a stranger, because it makes you question your judgment about people. Exactly. I felt that way when I found out Emma had been trying to reach me when she crashed, that if I'd answered my phone, if I'd been paying attention instead of being unconscious from pain medication, maybe I could have warned her about the road conditions. Maybe she'd still be alive. Noah's voice was quiet but steady. Took me a long time to understand that you can't control other people's choices. Can't prevent every tragedy. Can only control how you respond when things fall apart. How did you respond? Made a promise to never let someone suffer alone if I could prevent it, to pay attention when others looked away, to care even when it cost me. He smiled slightly, which is how I ended up asking about power consumption in empty buildings and accidentally exposing corporate fraud. Not so accidentally. You saw what others missed because you were actually looking. And you listened because you wanted the truth more than you wanted comfortable lies. That's the part that matters, Ms. Harper. Not that I noticed something wrong, but that you were willing to act on it even when it destroyed everything you'd worked for. Evelyn felt the weight of the evening pressing down on her, the confrontation with Robert, the fire, Marcus's confession, the realization that the conspiracy went even deeper than she'd feared. But Noah's presence, his quiet certainty that caring about truth mattered, made it feel bearable. Tomorrow you're supposed to come to my office to discuss the oversight position, she said. After tonight, after everything that's happened, are you still willing to take it on? Are you still willing to create it, knowing that having someone whose job is finding problems will probably make your life harder? Yes. Then yes, I'm still willing. Even though it might mean discovering more people like Marcus, more betrayals, more fraud, more uncomfortable truths? Especially then, because that's when it matters most. When the easy choice is to stop looking, to accept that you found enough problems and declare victory, that's when you need someone who won't stop asking questions. They stood together in the lobby of Harper Tower, surrounded by the aftermath of smoke and conspiracy, and Evelyn felt something clarify in her mind. The board might force her out. Shareholders might demand her resignation. The investigation might reveal even worse corruption than they'd discovered tonight. But she would face it all with someone beside her who understood that promises mattered more than success, that truth was worth protecting even when it cost everything. Go home, she said gently. Your daughter needs you, and you need sleep before tomorrow. What about you? I need to brief our legal team, contact the prosecutors, start the process of unwinding whatever conspiracy Marcus and Morrison built. It's going to be a long night. Then I'll see you in the morning. And Miss Harper, Noah hesitated, then continued. Thank you for keeping your promise, even when it was hard, even when everyone told you to stop. It matters more than you know. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd of employees returning to collect belongings and gossip about the evening's drama. Evelyn watched him go, then turned to face Tom Reeves and the lawyers who were gathering to begin damage control. The real work was just beginning. The work of exposing every person involved in the fraud. The work of rebuilding trust that had been shattered. The work of proving that choosing truth over profit was leadership, not madness. But as she walked toward the conference room where her legal team waited, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not confidence exactly, and certainly not certainty about the future, but purpose. The sense that what she was doing mattered in ways that went beyond stock prices and quarterly earnings. Her father had built this company on integrity. She had almost lost that legacy chasing mergers and market share. But maybe, just maybe, she could build it back. One uncomfortable truth at a time. One promise kept. One person who noticed things standing beside her, refusing to look away. The glass tower stood against the night sky, its windows reflecting the city lights, its secrets beginning to surface. And somewhere in Queens, a janitor was probably tucking his daughter into bed, telling her about the importance of keeping promises, about noticing when things were wrong, about caring even when it cost you everything. Tomorrow, they would face whatever came next, together. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 a.m. before the markets opened, before the media had time to fully digest the previous night's events. Evelyn stood at the head of the conference table facing 17 exhausted, angry people who held her professional future in their hands. Marcus's confession had changed everything and nothing. Yes, they now had proof the fraud went deeper than Morrison. Yes, Evelyn's decision to kill the Titan merger looked more justified in hindsight. But the company's stock price had dropped another 12% overnight. 3 major institutional investors had publicly called for new leadership, and the Wall Street Journal's morning headline read, Harper Industries in crisis as CFO arrested in fraud scheme. Let's be clear about where we stand, Robert Chen said, opening the meeting with the kind of bluntness that only someone with 4 decades of board experience could deliver. Our CFO is in federal custody. Our merger is dead. Our stock is in free fall. And half this room thinks our CEO either showed remarkable courage or catastrophic judgment in how she handled the situation. We need to decide which one it is before the markets destroy us. The markets are reacting to uncertainty, Evelyn said. Once we announce the full scope of our cooperation with federal investigators, once we demonstrate that we're committed to transparency and accountability, investor confidence will stabilize. That's optimistic bordering on delusional, said Patricia Morrison, who was no relation to David Morrison, but equally skeptical of Evelyn's leadership. Investor confidence stabilizes when they trust management's judgment. Right now, they're watching a CEO who torpedoed a $3 billion deal based on a janitor's concerns and then discovered her own CFO was part of the conspiracy. That doesn't inspire confidence. That inspires panic. Would you have preferred I ignored the evidence? Let the merger proceed and deal with the fallout when the fraud became public after the deal closed. I would have preferred you conducted a thorough investigation before making dramatic announcements. You had circumstantial evidence, not proof. You should have brought it to this board. Let us weigh the risk together, made a collective decision about how to proceed. There wasn't time for collective decision-making. Morrison was destroying evidence. Marcus was trying to cover their tracks. Every day we delayed was another day they could hide what they'd done. So you say, but we only have your interpretation of events. Your belief that the situation was urgent enough to justify unilateral action. Evelyn had known this argument was coming, had prepared responses, had armed herself with evidence and logic. But sitting across from Patricia Morrison's skeptical expression, she realized that no amount of evidence would convince someone who had already decided she was wrong. I have the server logs showing Morrison accessing confidential systems, she said, keeping her voice level. I have the financial records showing payments from shell companies to offshore accounts. I have security footage of Marcus attempting to destroy computer equipment containing evidence of the conspiracy. And I have 3 additional suspects that Marcus identified in exchange for cooperation. That's not interpretation. That's documented fact. Facts that emerged after you killed the merger, not before. Because the merger cancellation forced them to panic. Forced them to make mistakes that exposed the full scope of their fraud, or created a self-fulfilling prophecy where innocent actions look suspicious because you've already decided guilt. They were going in circles, Evelyn realized. Patricia had made up her mind before the meeting started, and nothing Evelyn said would change that. The question was how many other board members shared her skepticism. Robert intervened before the argument could escalate further. We're not here to retry decisions that have already been made. We're here to decide what happens next. So let's focus on that. Evelyn, what's your plan for stabilizing the company? Evelyn had spent the hours between the fire and this meeting preparing exactly this answer. She pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen, detailed recovery strategies she and her remaining executive team had developed. First, complete transparency with federal investigators. We cooperate fully, provide all evidence, accept whatever consequences emerge from the investigation. Second, comprehensive internal audit of all major financial operations. We bring in outside forensic accountants, give them unrestricted access, and publicly commit to implementing whatever reforms they recommend. Third, immediate board oversight committee to review all M&A activity, all financial projections, all major strategic decisions. No more unilateral executive actions without board approval. That last one sounds like you admitting your judgment can't be trusted, Patricia said. It sounds like me acknowledging that no one person should have unchecked authority, that oversight and accountability make better decisions than individual brilliance, that the problems we're facing came from too much trust in individual executives and not enough systematic verification. And fourth, Robert prompted. Evelyn took a breath. This was the part that would either win them over or cement their opposition. Fourth, we create a permanent internal oversight position. Someone whose job is to notice inconsistencies, ask uncomfortable questions, and report directly to this board without filtering through executive management. Someone who has no career advancement tied to quarterly earnings, no bonus dependent on merger success, no reason to overlook problems because acknowledging them is inconvenient. The room went silent. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Everyone had heard about the janitor who noticed power consumption in empty buildings, whose questions had started the chain of events that exposed the fraud. You want to hire Noah Brooks, Patricia said flatly. I want to create a position that values the kind of attention to detail and commitment to truth that Mr. Brooks demonstrated. Whether he fills that position or we find someone else with similar qualities, the role itself is necessary. He's a janitor with no corporate experience, no financial training, no understanding of how businesses actually operate. Well, he understood enough to spot fraud that our CFO was committing, that our accounting department was facilitating, that our professional auditors missed completely. He got lucky, noticed one inconsistency, and happened to be right about it being significant. No, Evelyn said firmly, he was observant. There's a difference between luck and paying attention when everyone else chooses not to. Another board member spoke up, James Chen, Robert's nephew and generally a more moderate voice. Even if we accept that Mr. Brooks's observations were valuable in this specific instance, that doesn't qualify him for a permanent position. You're asking us to create an executive-level role for someone based on one success. That's not sound hiring practice. I'm asking you to create a role based on what we learned from this crisis. That professional credentials and corporate experience don't guarantee integrity. That sometimes the people best positioned to notice problems are the ones who haven't been socialized to ignore them. That we need someone in this organization whose job security doesn't depend on making executives comfortable. And you think a janitor can fill that role? I think Noah Brooks can, because he's proven he will ask questions even when it makes people uncomfortable, because he's demonstrated that he values truth over convenience, because he kept a promise to pay attention when everyone else had learned to look away. Robert leaned forward. Tell us about that promise. You've referenced it several times, but most of this board doesn't know the full context. Evelyn had debated whether to share Noah's personal story, whether exposing his tragedy to board scrutiny was a violation of his privacy. But he had told her she could use whatever arguments might help, and this was the argument that mattered most. Noah's wife died 3 years ago in a car accident. She was alone, in the cold, trying to reach him while he was unconscious from pain medication after a construction injury. He made a promise at her funeral that he would never let anyone suffer alone again if he could prevent it, that he would pay attention, that he would notice when people needed help, that he would care even when it cost him something. She let that sink in, watched the board members process what it meant to build your entire life around a promise made to someone who was gone. That promise governs everything he does, Evelyn continued. It's why he asked about power consumption in empty buildings, because systems running when they shouldn't might mean someone was working late, might mean someone needed help, might mean something was wrong that everyone else was ignoring. It's why he gave his jacket to someone he thought was asleep in a conference room. It's why he can't be bought or intimidated or convinced to overlook problems, because acknowledging them is inconvenient. His integrity isn't a professional stance. It's how he honors his wife's memory. The silence that followed was different from the skeptical quiet that had preceded it. This was the silence of people confronting something they hadn't expected, something that didn't fit neatly into their categories of acceptable corporate behavior. That's a compelling story, Patricia said finally, but compelling stories don't qualify someone for executive positions. We need skills, experience, proven ability to handle complex organizational dynamics. We need integrity, Evelyn countered. We need someone who won't compromise truth for political expediency. And in my experience, you can teach skills, you can develop expertise, but you can't teach someone to care about promises more than career advancement. They either have that quality or they don't. So we're supposed to gamble the company's future on your belief that moral character matters more than professional competence? We're supposed to learn from the fact that our most professionally competent CFO was committing fraud, that our credentialed executives missed what a janitor noticed, that professional competence without integrity is worse than useless. It's dangerous. The argument continued for another hour, board members raising objections and Evelyn answering them, Robert occasionally intervening to keep the discussion from becoming purely adversarial. Evelyn could feel the room dividing along familiar lines. Those who had supported her merger cancellation mostly backed the oversight position, while those who had opposed it saw this as further evidence of her poor judgment. Finally, Robert called for a vote. All those in favor of creating the internal oversight position, as Evelyn has outlined, with hiring authority to be determined by a board committee? 9 hands went up. 8 remained down. Evelyn had won by a single vote. Motion carries, Robert said. We'll form a hiring committee to determine qualification requirements and interview candidates. Evelyn, You'll have one seat on that committee, but final hiring authority will rest with the board. Agreed? Agreed. And we revisit this decision in 6 months to assess whether the position is actually providing value or just creating additional organizational friction. Also agreed? Also agreed? Patricia Morrison shook her head. This is a mistake. We're creating a position designed to question everything, to second-guess every decision, to make people afraid to act because they might be reported for doing their jobs. It's going to paralyze decision-making and drive talented executives away. Or it's going to prevent future fraud, Evelyn said. I guess we'll find out which one matters more. The meeting adjourned with no consensus, no resolution of the fundamental divide about whether Evelyn's leadership was saving the company or destroying it. She walked back to her office alone, feeling the weight of the narrow victory. 9 to 8 wasn't a mandate. It was a warning that half the board wanted her gone and were looking for justification to make that happen. Her assistant intercepted her before she reached her office. Mr. Brooks is here. He's been waiting since 7:30. Evelyn checked her watch. Nearly 9 a.m. She'd made him wait while she fought for a position he didn't even know the details of yet. Noah was sitting in her reception area, still in casual clothes because he'd worked the night shift and hadn't had time to go home and change. He stood when she entered, and she could see the exhaustion in his face. He'd probably gone straight from work to dropping Lily at school to coming here without sleeping. I'm sorry I kept you waiting, Evelyn said. The board meeting ran long. It's fine. How did it go? Come into my office and I'll tell you. She closed the door behind them and gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing, clearly too tired to relax, but too proud to show weakness. The board approved creating the oversight position, she said. 9 to 8 vote. They're forming a hiring committee, and I'll have one seat on it, but the board will make the final decision about who fills the role. Noah absorbed this information without visible reaction. So you can nominate me, but they might reject the nomination? Yes, which is why I need to know before we go any further. Are you sure you want this? Being questioned by a committee of board members who think a janitor has no business in corporate oversight? Potentially being rejected not because you're unqualified, but because half the board thinks I've lost my mind? Do you think you've lost your mind? The question was so direct, so sincere, that Evelyn found herself answering honestly. Sometimes, when I'm lying awake at 3 a.m. thinking about the stock price, about the employees whose retirement funds are tied to our success, about whether I destroyed everything my father built by choosing principles over pragmatism, yes, sometimes I think I've lost my mind. But you don't regret the choice. No, I regret how much it's costing everyone around me, but I don't regret choosing truth over profit. Noah finally sat down, his exhaustion winning over his pride. My daughter asked me this morning why I was going to see the lady from the park. I told her we were going to talk about a new job. She asked if it meant I wouldn't be her daddy anymore because new jobs meant people changed. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. What did you tell her? That I would always be her daddy, that new jobs might change what I do during the day, but they don't change who I am or what matters to me. That promises stay the same even when everything else changes. Do you believe that? I have to, because if I don't, if I start thinking that circumstances justify breaking promises, then I become someone I don't recognize. Someone Emma wouldn't recognize. Someone Lily shouldn't trust. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them wrestling with the weight of promises made and the cost of keeping them. The board committee is going to ask you questions, Evelyn said finally, about your qualifications, your experience, your understanding of corporate operations. They're going to try to prove you're not suited for this role, because I'm not. Not by traditional standards, but you're suited by the standards that actually matter, by the measure of whether someone will tell the truth even when it's costly, whether someone will ask questions even when people wish they wouldn't, whether someone can be trusted to keep promises when the pressure builds to break them. That's a lot of weight to put on one person. What if I fail? What if I miss something important, or ask the wrong questions, or make a mistake that costs the company? Then you'll be like every other executive who's ever held a position of responsibility. The difference is, I'll know your mistakes came from trying to do what's right, not from protecting what's convenient. Noah stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. Evelyn recognized the gesture. It was the same thing she did when she needed to think, needed space to process difficult decisions. "I need to understand something," he said without turning around. "This position you're creating, is it real? Is it something that will actually have authority and impact? Or is it a gesture, a way of making you feel better about the fraud without actually changing how the company operates?" "It's real. Or at least I'm going to fight to make it real. Direct reporting to the board, unrestricted access to financial systems, authority to investigate any operations that seem questionable. The whole point is creating someone who can't be shut down by executive pressure." "That's going to make people hate me." "Almost certainly. And you're okay with that? With creating a position that's designed to make people uncomfortable?" "I'm counting on it, because comfortable people don't change. Comfortable organizations don't reform. And right now we need profound change, not incremental adjustment." Noah turned from the window. "Then I have a condition. If I take this position, if I agree to go through the committee process and potentially face rejection from people who think I don't belong in their world, you have to promise me something." "What?" "That you won't fire me for doing the job correctly. That when I find things you don't want to know, when I ask questions that make you look bad, when I expose problems that would be easier to hide, you'll support what I'm doing even when it costs you politically." Evelyn thought about Marcus's betrayal, about Patricia Morrison's skepticism, about the narrow board vote that could easily flip against her with the next crisis. Making promises she might not be able to keep was dangerous, but refusing to make them was admitting defeat before they'd even started. "I promise," she said, "I'll support you in doing the job correctly, even when it makes my life harder, even when board members complain, even when it would be easier to ask you to look the other way." "And if the board fires you? If they decide new leadership is needed and your replacement doesn't share your commitment to uncomfortable truths? Then I'll make it a condition of my departure that the oversight position remains protected, that whoever takes over has to honor the mandate we're creating. You can't guarantee that." "No, but I can try. And trying is all any of us can do when we're keeping promises that cost more than we expected." They looked at each other across her office, and Evelyn saw understanding pass between them. They were both making bets on principles that might not survive contact with reality, both choosing to believe that integrity mattered more than safety, both hoping that keeping promises would be worth whatever it cost. "All right," Noah said, "I'll do the interview. I'll face the committee. And if they approve me, I'll take the position and do the job the way it needs to be done." Even knowing it might mean discovering more fraud, more betrayals, more proof that the company's problems go deeper than Morrison and Marcus. Especially then, because that's when it matters most, when the easy choice is to declare victory and stop looking. Evelyn felt something like hope for the first time since the board meeting. Not confidence exactly, and certainly not certainty about the outcome, but hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something that actually mattered. "The committee meets next week," she said. "I'll send you the details. They'll want to review your background, understand your approach to oversight, assess your ability to handle corporate dynamics." "I'll be ready." "Noah," Evelyn hesitated, then continued, "they're going to try to prove you're not qualified. They're going to question your education, your experience, your understanding of business operations. And some of it will be legitimate concerns, but some of it will be people trying to protect themselves from accountability. You need to be prepared for both." "I've been questioned before. By people who thought construction workers didn't deserve safe equipment. By social workers who thought homeless fathers couldn't raise daughters properly. By landlords who thought people without perfect credit should stay on the streets. This won't be my first time proving I belong somewhere people don't think I should be." The quiet steel in his voice reminded Evelyn that she wasn't saving Noah by offering this position. He had survived losses and challenges that would have broken most people. He didn't need rescuing. He needed an opportunity to use everything he'd learned from those struggles. "Then I'll see you next week," she said. After Noah left, Evelyn spent the rest of the morning in meetings with lawyers and federal investigators, walking through the evidence Marcus had provided, identifying the 3 additional suspects in the conspiracy: 2 accounting department employees who had helped hide the shell company payments, and 1 Titan Industries executive who had fed insider information to Morrison in exchange for a share of the eventual profits from Vanguard's hostile takeover. By noon, all 3 were in custody. By evening, their lawyers were negotiating cooperation agreements, and by the time Evelyn finally left her office at midnight, she had a complete map of how the fraud had worked, who had been involved, and how deeply the corruption had penetrated Harper Industries. The accounting employees were relatively junior, following orders from Marcus without fully understanding the broader conspiracy. The Titan executive was more culpable, actively working to undermine his own company's negotiating position for personal gain. But none of them had Morrison's sophisticated understanding of financial engineering or Marcus's authority to implement systemic changes. The fraud had been contained to 5 people total. Not the widespread corruption that could have destroyed the entire company, but serious enough to justify everything Evelyn had done to stop it. That should have felt like vindication. Should have proven that killing the merger was right, that exposing the conspiracy was necessary, that her judgment deserved the board's trust. Instead, it just felt exhausting. She was gathering her things to finally go home when her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Ms. Harper, this is Linda Brooks, Noah's neighbor, the one who watches Lily when he works nights. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Is everything all right? Is Noah? Noah's fine. Lily's fine. But I thought you should know there were reporters at the school today asking questions about Noah, about why he was meeting with Harper Industries executives, about whether he was getting special treatment because of the fraud investigation. Did they approach Lily? The school kept them away from the children, but they were waiting outside when Noah picked her up, asking him questions about the investigation, about his relationship with you, about whether he was being offered money to stay quiet about what he'd discovered. Evelyn felt anger flash through her exhaustion. Did Noah say anything to them? He said no comment and left. But Ms. Harper, he looked shaken, not scared exactly, but like he hadn't expected this kind of attention, like he hadn't thought through what being connected to a corporate fraud case would mean for his daughter's safety. Thank you for calling, Linda. I'll handle this. Handle it how? The story's already out there. Business press is reporting that Harper Industries is creating a special oversight position for the janitor who exposed the fraud. They've connected Noah to the investigation, published his name, probably dug up his whole background by now. I'll make a statement. Clarify that Noah was an employee doing his job, not a whistleblower seeking attention. Protect his privacy. His privacy is already gone. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Noah chose to help because he thought it was the right thing to do. But now his daughter is going to grow up as the kid whose father exposed corporate fraud. She's going to deal with reporters and attention and people making assumptions about why he did it. That's not what he signed up for. Linda was right. Evelyn had been so focused on fighting board battles and managing federal investigations that she hadn't thought about what public exposure would mean for Noah's family, hadn't considered that a 6-year-old girl might pay the price for her father's integrity. I'll call him, Evelyn said. Make sure he understands what's happening and what I can do to protect them. What you can do is leave them alone. Let Noah go back to being invisible, to living his life without being part of your corporate drama. He's a good man, Ms. Harper. He deserves better than being used as a symbol of your moral redemption. The accusation stung because it carried truth. Was that what she was doing? Using Noah's story to prove her own integrity? Putting him and his daughter at risk to demonstrate that she valued truth over comfort? I'll call him, she repeated. And Linda, thank you for watching out for them. Someone needs to, because the people in glass towers don't always think about what happens to the people on the ground when they start their wars. The line went dead. Evelyn sat in her empty office, staring at her phone, and felt the full weight of what she had set in motion. She had exposed fraud, had protected the company from a catastrophic merger, had created a path toward genuine reform. But she had also painted a target on Noah's back, had exposed him and his daughter to scrutiny and pressure they never asked for, had turned his quiet promise to notice things into a public narrative about corporate whistleblowing. She called Noah's cell phone. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice tired. Ms. Harper. Linda called me, told me about the reporters at Lily's school. Yeah, that was unexpected. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated that the media would connect you to the investigation once the board approved the oversight position. I should have prepared you for the attention. I'm a grown man. I can handle reporters. But Lily, she doesn't understand why people were asking her teacher questions about her daddy. She's scared that something bad is happening. What did you tell her? That sometimes when grown-ups try to fix problems, other grown-ups get curious about how they figured out what was wrong. That the people asking questions aren't trying to hurt anyone, they're just trying to understand what happened. Did that help? She asked me if we were in trouble, if the police were going to take me away like they did to the man in her friend's apartment building. I had to explain that helping stop bad things is different from doing bad things, and that wasn't a distinction a 6-year-old should have to understand. Evelyn heard the strain in his voice, the exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. I can issue a statement. Ask the media to respect your privacy, to leave your family alone. That'll just make them more interested. Tell them there's a story worth protecting. Then what do you want me to do? Noah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something Evelyn hadn't heard from him before. Doubt. I want to know if this is worth it. If putting my daughter through this scrutiny, if having her grow up as the whistleblower's kid, if dealing with reporters and attention and people making assumptions about our lives, if all of that is actually going to change anything, or if we're just sacrificing our peace for symbolic gestures that make you feel better about corporate corruption. The question hung between them, and Evelyn realized this was the real test, not the board vote or the federal investigation or the public scrutiny. This was the moment when someone who had agreed to help because he believed in keeping promises was confronting the actual cost of that choice. I don't know, she said honestly. I can't promise that creating the oversight position will prevent future fraud. I can't guarantee that exposing Morrison and Marcus will reform corporate culture. I can't assure you that what we're doing will matter in 5 years or 10 years, or whether it will just be a footnote in Harper Industries' history that no one remembers. Then why are we doing it? Because the alternative is accepting that promises don't matter, that noticing things is pointless because the system will always protect those who benefit from not noticing. That integrity is a luxury only people without responsibilities can afford. That's not an answer. No, but it's the truth. And the truth is all I have to offer you right now. The truth that I don't know if this will work, but I know doing nothing guarantees it won't. The truth that your daughter might pay a price for your integrity, but she'll also learn that her father kept his promises even when it cost him something. The truth that we're betting everything on the hope that choosing what's right matters more than choosing what's safe. Noah sighed. Lily asked me tonight if I was a hero, like the ones in her books who fight dragons and save kingdoms. I told her I was just a dad trying to do the right thing. She said heroes always say that. She's not wrong. She's 6. She thinks the world is simple. Good people win, bad people lose, and promises always get kept. I don't want to be the one who teaches her that's not true. Then don't. Keep your promises. Show her that even when things get hard, even when reporters show up and people ask uncomfortable questions, you don't stop doing what's right. That's the lesson that matters. And if it destroys us, if the attention becomes too much, if people start threatening us or following us or making our lives impossible, then we stop. We withdraw from the investigation, you decline the oversight position, and I protect your anonymity to whatever extent possible. Your daughter's safety matters more than any corporate reform. Your family's peace matters more than my need to prove I made the right choice. She heard Noah take a breath, heard him processing what she'd said, heard the moment when he made his decision. All right, he said finally, we keep going. But Ms. Harper, if this gets worse, if Lily starts having nightmares, or the school says the attention is disrupting her education, or if I see any sign that this is damaging her, we're done. No negotiations, no convincing me to push through, no appeals to the greater good. My promise to Emma comes first. Always. I understand, and I respect that. I hope so. Because I'm trusting you with more than just my career. I'm trusting you with my daughter's childhood. And if you betray that trust, there's no coming back from it. After the call ended, Evelyn sat alone in her office and faced the full weight of what Noah had said. She wasn't just responsible for the company anymore. She was responsible for protecting a 6-year-old girl from the consequences of her father's integrity, for ensuring that doing the right thing didn't destroy the very people it was supposed to honor. The glass tower stood silent around her, its floors empty except for security guards and the occasional late-working executive. Somewhere in Queens, Noah was probably sitting beside his daughter's bed, making sure she felt safe, making sure she understood that even when things got complicated, her father would always be there. And here in Manhattan, Evelyn was making promises she wasn't sure she could keep, betting that truth would triumph over power, hoping that integrity would prove stronger than institutional inertia. Tomorrow, the committee would interview Noah, would question his qualifications, his experience, his right to challenge executives who had spent decades in corporate leadership, would decide whether a janitor who kept promises to ghosts deserved a voice in how Harper Industries governed itself. Evelyn didn't know how the interview would go, didn't know if the board would approve Noah's appointment, didn't know if the reform she was fighting for would survive the next crisis or the next change in leadership. But she knew that Noah had trusted her with something precious, that he had put his daughter's future in her hands, along with his own career, and that breaking that trust would be worse than any board vote, any stock price decline, any failure of corporate reform. Some promises mattered more than success. Some relationships were worth protecting even when they complicated everything else. And some people deserve better than being used as symbols in battles they never asked to fight. Tomorrow she would protect Noah through the committee interview, would make sure his story was heard without being exploited, would fight for the oversight position while respecting his right to walk away if the cost became too high. Tonight she just had to hope that was enough, that trying to do right by the people who had trusted her would somehow be worth the chaos it had created. The city lights glittered below, millions of lives intersecting in ways no one could fully predict. And in one small apartment in Queens, a little girl was learning that her father was either a hero or a fool, depending on whether promises turned out to matter in the end. Evelyn gathered her things and finally left for home, carrying the weight of too many promises and not enough certainty that keeping them would make any difference at all. The committee interview was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 10. Evelyn arrived early to find Noah already there, sitting in the waiting area outside the boardroom, wearing a suit that looked borrowed and shoes that had been polished until they shone. He stood when he saw her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control that came from facing something that terrified him but refusing to show it. "You didn't have to wear a suit," Evelyn said gently. "Yes, I did. They're looking for reasons to dismiss me. I'm not giving them clothing as an excuse." "The suit doesn't change who you are." "No, but it shows I'm taking this seriously, that I understand the stakes." He glanced toward the closed boardroom door. "How bad is this going to be?" "Honest answer? Patricia Morrison is going to try to humiliate you. She's going to ask questions designed to prove you don't belong in corporate leadership. But Robert Chen will keep it fair, and I'll push back on anything that crosses into personal attacks." "What about the others?" "Mixed. Some genuinely want to understand if you're right for this role. Others have already decided you're not, and are looking for confirmation." Evelyn paused, then added, "But Noah, regardless of what happens in that room, you've already proven everything that matters. You noticed fraud when professionals missed it. You asked questions when silence would have been easier. You kept promises when breaking them would have cost you nothing. That's worth more than any committee approval. Tell that to Lily when I have to explain why the job didn't work out." Before Evelyn could respond, the boardroom door opened. Robert Chen appeared, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Brooks, we're ready for you." Noah took a breath, straightened his borrowed suit jacket, and walked into the room. Evelyn followed, taking her seat at the committee table while Noah sat alone in the chair facing 7 board members who would determine his future. Patricia Morrison started before Noah had fully settled. "Mr. Brooks, your employment file shows you've worked as a janitor for 8 months, construction laborer before that, and various maintenance positions going back several years. Can you explain what qualifies you for an executive oversight position?" "I can't," Noah said simply. "Not by traditional measures. I don't have a business degree. I haven't worked my way up through corporate ranks. I don't understand most of the technical language you use in board meetings." Patricia's expression turned triumphant, like she'd already won. "Then why are we wasting our time with this interview?" "Because I understand something that your traditional qualifications apparently don't teach. I understand that numbers on spreadsheets represent real consequences for real people. That power consumption in empty buildings means someone is hiding something, that convenient explanations deserve skeptical questions, and that promises matter more than career advancement." That's a very poetic answer, but poetry doesn't qualify someone to oversee multi-billion-dollar operations. Neither does ignoring fraud because acknowledging it is inconvenient. But somehow your CFO had all the right qualifications and still nearly destroyed this company. The room went silent. Evelyn watched Patricia's face flush with anger, watched other committee members shift uncomfortably, watched Robert suppress what might have been a smile. "You're suggesting," Patricia said coldly, "that professional experience is worthless because one executive committed fraud?" "I'm suggesting that professional experience teaches people what to overlook, how to accept questionable explanations because challenging them creates conflict, when to stop asking questions because the answers might be uncomfortable. And I'm suggesting that someone who never learned those lessons might notice things that everyone else has been trained to ignore." James Chen spoke up, his tone more measured than Patricia's. "Mr. Brooks, oversight requires understanding complex financial operations, corporate governance structures, regulatory compliance frameworks. How do you propose to evaluate those areas without technical expertise? I don't need to understand every detail to recognize patterns. I don't need accounting credentials to notice when numbers don't match what I observe. I don't need legal training to ask why systems are running when buildings should be empty." Noah leaned forward slightly. "Your technical experts missed the fraud because they were looking at data. I noticed it because I was looking at reality. There's a difference. But effective oversight requires more than just noticing anomalies. It requires understanding whether those anomalies are actually problems or just normal business operations that appear unusual to someone without context." "Then teach me the context. Give me access to people who can explain the technical details, but don't expect me to adopt the blind spots that come with that expertise. Don't expect me to stop asking questions just because I've learned enough vocabulary to rationalize away the inconsistencies." Another committee member, Sarah Williams, spoke thoughtfully. "You're describing a role that's inherently adversarial. Someone who questions everything, challenges conventional explanations, disrupts normal operations with constant skepticism. How do you propose to do that without creating organizational paralysis?" Noah considered the question. "I don't think asking questions creates paralysis. I think avoiding questions because they're inconvenient creates the kind of rot that eventually collapses entire structures. But you're right that there needs to be balance. I'm not suggesting we question every decision or challenge every choice. I'm suggesting we question the things that don't make sense, the patterns that suggest people are hiding something, the convenient explanations that solve immediate problems but create long-term risks. And who decides what makes sense? What patterns are suspicious? What explanations are too convenient? Initially, me, with oversight from this board to ensure I'm not seeing conspiracies where none exist. But over time, we build institutional knowledge. We create standards for what triggers investigation, what requires deeper scrutiny, what deserves the benefit of the doubt. We turn individual judgment into systematic verification. Robert Chen entered the conversation. "Mr. Brooks, you've talked about promises several times. Can you explain what you mean by that?" Noah's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. This was personal territory, and Evelyn could see him weighing how much to share. "I made a promise to my late wife," he said finally, "that I would pay attention when others looked away, that I would notice when people needed help, that I would care about things everyone else had learned to ignore, and I've tried to keep that promise in everything I do. Even when keeping it costs you something? Especially then, that's when promises matter most. And if keeping that promise in this role means exposing fraud that damages the company, that costs employees their jobs, that destroys shareholder value, then I keep the promise anyway, because the alternative is letting corruption grow until it destroys even more. I'd rather pay the cost of truth now than the price of deception later." Patricia jumped back in. "That's an admirable philosophy for personal ethics, but corporate oversight requires pragmatism. Requires understanding that sometimes you accept minor problems to preserve major successes. Requires choosing strategic silence over destructive honesty." "If that's what corporate oversight requires," Noah said quietly, "then you don't want me for this position, because I can't promise strategic silence. I can't look away from problems because acknowledging them is inconvenient. I can only promise that I'll tell you the truth as I understand it and let you decide what to do with that information. Even if that truth destroys the company? The truth didn't destroy Harper Industries. The fraud did. I just noticed it before it could spread further." The interview continued for another hour, committee members probing Noah's background, his approach to oversight, his ability to handle corporate pressure. Patricia kept trying to corner him into admitting he was unqualified. James and Sarah asked substantive questions about methodology and process. Robert mostly listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions that suggested he was taking Noah seriously. Finally, Robert called for a break. "Mr. Brooks, please wait outside while the committee deliberates. We'll call you back when we've reached a decision." Noah left the room, and Evelyn watched 7 board members prepare to determine whether a janitor who kept promises to ghosts deserved a voice in corporate governance. Patricia spoke first. "This is absurd. We're actually considering creating an executive position for someone who admits he doesn't understand basic business operations. Someone whose primary qualification is that he asked about power consumption and got lucky that it was connected to fraud." "It wasn't luck," Evelyn countered. "It was observation. It was caring enough to ask questions when everyone else accepted convenient answers. It was one success, one isolated instance that doesn't prove ongoing capability. You're asking us to gamble the company's credibility on someone with no track record, no professional training, no demonstrated ability to handle complex organizational dynamics. I'm asking you to recognize that traditional qualifications failed to prevent Morrison and Marcus from committing fraud, that professional credentials didn't stop our accounting department from facilitating deception, that maybe we need someone who hasn't been socialized into accepting that corruption is just business as usual." Sarah Williams intervened. "I think we're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether Noah Brooks has traditional qualifications. It's whether he has the qualities we actually need for this role. And based on what I've heard today, he has integrity that can't be compromised, observational skills that noticed what professionals missed, and commitment to truth that survived significant personal cost. Those qualities matter." "Those qualities matter in a moral philosophy class," Patricia shot back. "In actual corporate operations, we need expertise, experience, and understanding of how businesses function in competitive markets. We need someone who won't bring operations to a halt every time they notice something that seems unusual to untrained eyes." James Chen spoke thoughtfully. "I'm troubled by something Mr. Brooks said about professional experience teaching people what to overlook, about credentials creating blind spots, because I think he's right about that. I've seen it in my own career, the gradual acceptance of practices that would have horrified me as a younger person, the rationalization of choices that serve short-term interests over long-term integrity, and I'm not sure we can afford to keep hiring people who have already learned those lessons." "So your solution is to hire someone who hasn't learned anything?" Patricia demanded. "My solution is to hire someone who learned different lessons, who learned that promises matter, that paying attention prevents tragedies, that caring about truth is worth personal cost, and then give him the training and support to apply those lessons in a corporate context." The debate continued, positions hardening along predictable lines. Patricia and 2 allies insisted Noah was unqualified. Sarah and James argued his qualities mattered more than credentials. Robert remained neutral, asking questions but not revealing his position. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "I want to share something Noah told me when we first discussed this position. He said that if he took this role, he would find things I didn't want to know, that he would ask questions that made me look bad, that he would expose problems that would be easier to hide, and he made me promise to support him doing the job correctly, even when it cost me politically." She paused, letting that sink in. "I made that promise, and I'm asking you to make the same commitment, not to Noah specifically, but to the principle of oversight that actually functions. Oversight that isn't captured by the executives, it's supposed to monitor. Oversight that can't be shut down when it becomes inconvenient." "And you think a janitor provides that oversight?" Patricia asked skeptically. "I think someone who has nothing to gain from protecting executives and everything to lose from lying provides that oversight. Someone whose job security doesn't depend on making leadership comfortable. Someone whose promises matter more than career advancement. Whether that's Noah Brooks or someone else with similar qualities, that's what we need." Robert called for a vote. "All those in favor of offering Noah Brooks the oversight position, with appropriate training and support, subject to 6-month performance review." 4 hands went up, Robert's, Sarah's, James's, and Evelyn's. 3 remained down. "Motion carries," Robert said. "We'll draw up an employment offer with terms to be negotiated. Evelyn, you'll work with HR to structure the training program and reporting requirements. And we'll reconvene in 6 months to assess whether this experiment is working or needs revision." Patricia stood abruptly. I'm registering my objection to this decision in the formal minutes, and I'm stating for the record that when this fails, when Mr. Brooks proves unable to handle the responsibilities of this position, the board should remember who supported this mistake. She left without waiting for a response. The other committee members filed out more quietly, leaving just Evelyn and Robert. You know this is going to be difficult, Robert said. Noah will face resistance from executives who resent being questioned by someone they consider beneath them. He'll make mistakes as he learns the role, and if he fails, if this doesn't work out, it will be used as evidence that your judgment can't be trusted. I know. And you're willing to stake your career on someone you've known for less than 2 weeks? I'm staking my career on the principle that integrity matters more than credentials, that noticing things matters more than professional socialization, that promises kept deserve more trust than promises broken. Whether Noah succeeds or fails, those principles are worth fighting for. Robert studied her for a long moment. Your father would be proud of you, and probably terrified for you. This is the kind of stand that either defines a career or ends it. Then I guess we'll find out which one it is. They called Noah back into the boardroom. He entered cautiously, his expression carefully neutral, clearly braced for rejection. Mr. Brooks, Robert said formally, the committee has decided to offer you the position of Director of Internal Oversight, subject to terms to be negotiated and 6-month performance review. Are you willing to accept? Noah's face remained still, but Evelyn saw his hands tighten on the chair armrests. What are the terms? Salary commensurate with director-level positions, which will be significantly more than your current compensation. Direct reporting to this board, with monthly updates and quarterly comprehensive reviews. Unrestricted access to financial systems and operations, with appropriate training in how to interpret what you find. And immunity from retaliation for good faith reporting of potential problems, even if those reports prove unfounded. What about my daughter, the reporters who have been following us? We'll issue a statement that you're a regular employee filling a newly created position. We'll emphasize that you're not a whistleblower seeking publicity, but a professional doing your job. We can't control media interest, but we can make clear that Harper Industries doesn't support harassment of employees' families. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I need to talk to my daughter before I accept. Need to make sure she understands what this means. That her father's job might bring attention we don't want. That promises sometimes cost more than we expect. Of course, Robert said. Take a day to discuss it with your family. We'll have the formal offer ready when you've made your decision. Noah stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Chen, can I ask you something? Please? Why did you vote for me? You don't know me. You have no reason to believe I'll succeed. Why take the risk? Robert's expression softened slightly. Because 30 years ago, I was on a different board that ignored warnings from someone everyone considered beneath notice. A maintenance supervisor who said safety protocols weren't being followed. We dismissed his concerns because he didn't have engineering credentials, because his explanations weren't technically sophisticated, because listening to him would have required expensive changes we didn't want to make. He paused, and something painful crossed his face. 6 months later, there was an accident. 3 people died. And the investigation proved that maintenance supervisor had been right about everything. We could have prevented those deaths if we'd been willing to listen to someone who noticed things instead of dismissing them because they didn't have the right credentials. I'm sorry, Noah said quietly. So am I. Which is why I'm voting to give you this chance, because I won't make that mistake again. Won't let professional arrogance override honest observation. Won't dismiss truth because it comes from someone we don't consider qualified to speak it. After Noah left, Evelyn returned to her office and found Jennifer waiting with a message. Linda Brooks called, Noah's neighbor. She said it's urgent. Evelyn called back immediately, and Linda answered on the first ring. Ms. Harper, thank you for calling back. I need to tell you something about the reporters. What happened? They approached Lily directly this afternoon, waited until Noah was inside talking to the teacher, then asked her questions about her father. About whether he was getting money from Harper Industries, about whether he was worried about going to jail like the other executives. Evelyn felt cold fury wash through her. They questioned a 6-year-old child? She came home crying, asking Noah if he was going to jail, if they were going to lose their apartment, if she did something wrong that made people angry at Daddy. It took him an hour to calm her down. Where is she now? With Noah. He's trying to explain what's happening, but how do you explain corporate fraud investigation to a first grader? How do you make her understand that her father isn't in trouble? He's just trying to help when adults are asking scary questions. I'll handle this. I'll call our legal team, get a cease and desist order, make it clear that approaching minor children is unacceptable. That won't stop them. You know that. The story is too big. Noah's role is too unusual. They're going to keep digging until they get tired of it or find something more interesting. Linda was right. Legal threats might slow the media interest, but it wouldn't eliminate it. Not while the Harper Industries fraud case was national news, and Noah was the unexpected hero of the story. What does Noah want to do? Evelyn asked. He wants to protect his daughter, but he also wants to keep his promise. And I'm calling to tell you that you need to make a choice. You can push forward with this oversight position, put Noah in a public role that keeps media attention focused on his family. Or you can let him walk away, let him go back to being invisible, let Lily grow up without reporters asking her about corporate fraud. That's Noah's choice to make, not mine. No, it's your choice. Because Noah will do what he thinks is right, regardless of the cost to himself or his daughter. He'll keep his promise even if it destroys them both. So you need to be the adult who says this isn't worth it, who tells him that protecting Lily matters more than corporate reform, who gives him permission to choose his daughter over his principles. I can't make that choice for him. Then you're using his integrity against him. You're counting on the fact that he won't walk away, that he'll keep fighting because that's what his promise requires, and you're sacrificing his daughter's peace for your corporate redemption story. The accusation hit hard because it was uncomfortably close to truth. Was that what she was doing? Exploiting Noah's commitment to promises because it served her goals? Using his integrity as a weapon in battles he never asked to fight? I'll talk to him, Evelyn said. I'll make clear that walking away is acceptable, that protecting Lily is more important than any oversight position. Make sure you mean it, because Noah will hear the truth in your voice. He'll know if you're actually giving him permission or just performing concern while expecting him to stay. After the call ended, Evelyn sat alone in her office and confronted what she had been avoiding. She had told herself that creating the oversight position was about reforming corporate culture, preventing future fraud, honoring her father's legacy of integrity. But how much of it was about proving she had been right? About using Noah's story to justify her own choices? About sacrificing his family's peace to demonstrate that her principles mattered? She called Noah directly. He answered on the third ring, and she could hear Lily's voice in the background asking questions about dinner. I need to see you, Evelyn said. Tonight, at your apartment, if that's all right. I need to talk to you about something important. Linda called you. Yes. And you want to tell me that I should walk away from the oversight position, that protecting Lily matters more than corporate reform. I want to have a conversation that we should have had before the committee interview, about what this actually costs and whether it's worth paying. Noah was quiet for a moment. All right, come over after Lily's bedtime, 8:30. But Ms. Harper, if you're coming to give me permission to quit, you can save the trip. I don't need permission. I need to understand if what we're doing actually matters. The apartment in Queens was small, neat, filled with the kind of furniture that came from thrift stores and secondhand sales, but was maintained with obvious care. Children's drawings covered one wall, Lily's artwork showing stick figures in bright colors, and the optimistic chaos of a 6-year-old's imagination. On the small bookshelf, Evelyn spotted the photograph she had seen in Noah's jacket pocket, Emma and Lily in Maine, preserved behind glass like a shrine. Noah answered the door in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking more comfortable than he had in the borrowed suit. Lily's asleep. We can talk in the kitchen. They sat at a small table that barely fit 2 people, and Evelyn noticed the careful economy of the space. Everything organized for efficiency, nothing wasted, the kind of precision that came from years of making limited resources stretch to cover unlimited needs. Linda thinks I'm using you, Evelyn said without preamble, that I'm exploiting your integrity to prove my own, that I'm sacrificing your daughter's peace for corporate redemption, and I'm worried she's right. Noah poured them both coffee from a pot that looked older than Lily. Are you? I don't know. I tell myself that reforming Harper Industries matters, that preventing future fraud protects thousands of employees, that creating real oversight serves a greater good. But then I think about reporters questioning Lily, and I wonder if I'm just rationalizing my own need to be vindicated. You want me to tell you it's okay? That the greater good justifies putting my daughter through this? No. I want you to tell me if I should withdraw the job offer, if protecting Lily requires letting you walk away from this fight. Noah sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. I talked to Lily tonight, after the reporter scared her, after Linda called you. I explained that sometimes Daddy's job involves helping fix problems, and that makes some people curious. That the people asking questions aren't trying to hurt us, they're just trying to understand what happened. What did she say? She asked me if helping fix problems was like keeping promises, if noticing when things are wrong is the same thing I promised Mommy I would do. Noah's voice tightened slightly. And when I said yes, when I explained that this was part of the promise I made at Mommy's funeral, she said that promises are the most important thing, that even if people ask scary questions, we have to keep promises. Evelyn felt tears threaten. She's 6 years old. She shouldn't have to understand that promises require sacrifice. No, she shouldn't. But she already knows, because she watched me rebuild our lives after Emma died, watched me work nights so I could be with her during the day, watched me give jackets to strangers and explain that promises mean caring when it's inconvenient. She knows that the promise I made to her mother governs everything I do. That's too much weight to put on a child. I agree, but it's also the truth of our lives, and I'd rather she grow up understanding that promises matter even when they cost something than learn that we abandon our principles when they become uncomfortable. What if the cost is too high? What if the media attention gets worse? What if she faces bullying at school or ongoing harassment? Then we adjust. We find a school where she's not the fraud whistleblower's daughter. We move if we have to. We protect her while still honoring the commitment I made. Noah met Evelyn's eyes directly. But we don't quit just because it's hard, because that would teach her that promises are conditional, that you only keep them when they're convenient, and I can't be the father who teaches her that lesson. Even if keeping the promise hurts her? Short-term discomfort from reporters is different from long-term damage to her understanding of integrity. I can protect her from media harassment. I can't protect her from learning that her father breaks promises when they become costly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Noah's conviction filling the small kitchen. Evelyn thought about her own choices, about killing the Titan merger, about exposing Morrison and Marcus, about all the decisions she had made that prioritized principles over pragmatism. My father told me something before he died, she said finally. He said that the only legacy that matters is the one you can look at in the mirror, that success built on compromise isn't really success, it's just expensive failure. And I've been trying to honor that legacy while wondering if I'm just being stubborn. What do you see when you look in the mirror now? Someone who's trying, who's making mistakes and second-guessing herself and worried she's hurting people in the name of principles they never asked to fight for, but also someone who refuses to accept that fraud is acceptable, that corruption is just business as usual, that promises don't matter because everyone breaks them. Then keep trying, keep fighting, keep honoring your father's legacy the only way that matters, by choosing truth even when it costs you everything. Evelyn looked around the small apartment, at the thrift store furniture and children's drawings, and the photograph of Emma that still held pride of place years after her death. This was what integrity looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but the daily choice to keep promises even when no one was watching, even when it meant living in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens and working night shifts and facing reporters who thought you were either a hero or a fool. I'm going to issue a statement tomorrow, she said, making clear that Harper Industries doesn't tolerate harassment of employees' families, that Noah Brooks is a professional employee, not a public figure, that media outlets approaching minor children will face legal consequences. That won't stop them completely. No, but it might slow them down, and it makes clear where the company stands. Evelyn paused, then continued. I'm also going to establish a security detail for you and Lily. Nothing intrusive, just someone to make sure reporters don't approach her at school or follow you home. I can't afford private security. You're not paying for it. Harper Industries is. You're facing this attention because you helped us expose fraud. The least we can do is protect your family from the consequences." Noah looked like he wanted to argue, then recognized the practicality of accepting help. "All right, but nothing that makes Lily feel like we're in danger. Nothing that scares her more than the reporters already have." "Understood." They finished their coffee in companionable silence, two people who had stumbled into an unlikely partnership trying to figure out how to keep promises that kept getting more expensive. Finally, Evelyn stood to leave. "Thank you for letting me come here, for being honest about what this costs. Thank you for asking, for caring about what happens to Lily, for remembering that principles matter most when we apply them to real people instead of abstract ideals." As Evelyn left the apartment building, she found herself thinking about the photograph on Noah's shelf. Emma and Lily in Maine, captured in a moment before tragedy changed everything. That photograph was why Noah gave jackets to strangers, why he asked about power consumption in empty buildings, why he couldn't accept convenient explanations when reality suggested something was wrong. Some people kept promises because it served their interests. Others kept them because breaking them would mean becoming someone they couldn't recognize in the mirror. Noah was the latter kind, and that made him either the perfect person for oversight or dangerously naive about how corporations actually functioned. Evelyn suspected it was both. The next morning, she issued the statement about media harassment and established the security detail for Noah's family. By noon, most major outlets had agreed to stop approaching Lily directly. By evening, the story had shifted slightly. Less focus on Noah personally, more attention on the broader fraud investigation and Harper Industries reforms. The oversight position was formally created the following week. Noah's training began immediately. Meetings with financial analysts, sessions with compliance experts, tutorials on corporate governance frameworks. He absorbed it all with the focused attention of someone who understood that expertise mattered, even if it couldn't replace integrity. 3 months later, Noah submitted his first major oversight report. It identified accounting irregularities in the European division that had been classified as acceptable variance, but actually represented systematic overbilling of clients. The fraud was smaller than Morrison's scheme, contained to 2 employees rather than 5, but it followed the same pattern of convenient explanations accepted without adequate scrutiny. The board investigated, confirmed Noah's findings, fired the employees involved, and quietly acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, having someone who noticed things was worth the organizational friction it created. 6 months after Noah started, the board held the promised performance review. Patricia Morrison still thought the position was a mistake, still argued that Noah was finding problems where none existed, but she was outvoted 8-1, and the oversight role was made permanent. A year after the Titan merger collapsed, Harper Industries' stock price had recovered to previous levels. The fraud investigation had concluded with Morrison and Marcus both accepting plea agreements. The 3 additional conspirators had been prosecuted. And the company had implemented reforms that made systematic fraud significantly harder to hide. But the real change wasn't visible in stock prices or legal outcomes. It was visible in the way executives now responded when someone asked uncomfortable questions, in the way convenient explanations were met with skepticism rather than acceptance, in the slow, grinding shift from corporate culture that valued smoothness over truth to one that recognized truth was worth some friction. Evelyn stood in her office on a Friday evening, reviewing the quarterly board materials, when Jennifer appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here to see you. Says she has a delivery." Evelyn looked up to find Lily Brooks standing there, holding a large piece of construction paper covered in drawings. She was 7 now, taller than when Evelyn had first met her at the playground, but still with those same ribbons in her hair. "Hi, Ms. Harper. Daddy said I could bring you this if you weren't too busy." "I'm never too busy for you, Lily. What do you have there?" Lily held up the construction paper proudly. It showed Harper Tower drawn in crayon, tall and shiny with windows like stars. But at the base of the building she had drawn 2 figures, one tall wearing a suit, one shorter holding a mop. "It's you and Daddy," Lily explained, "working together to keep the building safe. Daddy says that's what partners do. They help each other notice things." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "It's beautiful. Can I keep it?" "That's why I made it. Daddy says you need reminders that doing hard things matters. That keeping promises is worth it, even when people ask scary questions. Your daddy is very wise. I know, that's because he keeps his promises, even the hard ones. Noah appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, despite the director title and the salary that could now afford better. He had insisted on keeping his night shift hours, had explained that being present when buildings were supposedly empty was when oversight mattered most. Sorry to interrupt, he said. Lily wanted to deliver that in person. I'm glad she did. Evelyn looked at the drawing again, at the simple representation of two people working together despite every difference in background and position and credential. This is going on my wall, right where I can see it when I'm making difficult decisions. Speaking of difficult decisions, Noah said, I need to talk to you about the Shanghai office. The power consumption reports don't match the occupancy schedules, and the explanations I'm getting feel too convenient. Another investigation? Probably. Unless you want me to accept the convenient explanations and move on. Evelyn smiled. When have I ever asked you to do that? Never. Which is why this partnership works. After they left, Evelyn hung Lily's drawing on the wall behind her desk, right next to her father's photograph. Two reminders of what mattered, two representations of promises kept even when the cost was higher than expected. The glass tower stood against the evening sky, its windows reflecting the city lights, its floors filled with people who were slowly learning that truth mattered more than comfort. It wasn't perfect. The reforms were incomplete, the cultural changes still fragile, the temptation to accept convenient explanations still present every day. But in a small office on the 53rd floor, a man who had once cleaned these floors now worked to keep them honest. A janitor who became a director not because he had the right credentials, but because he had the right character. Someone who kept promises to ghosts and taught a 6-year-old girl that integrity was worth fighting for. And in the corner office at the top of the tower, a CEO who had chosen truth over billions looked at a child's drawing and remembered why that choice mattered, why some promises were worth keeping regardless of cost, why noticing things was more valuable than ignoring them. The story would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. More investigations, more uncomfortable questions, more friction between truth and convenience. But it would continue with people who understood that promises mattered, that paying attention prevented tragedies, that caring about what was right was worth more than any merger or stock price or quarterly earnings report. Outside, the city moved through its evening rhythms, millions of people living millions of stories, most of them never intersecting with glass towers or corporate fraud or janitors who became heroes. But in this one building, in this one company, something had changed. Something small and fragile, but also resilient. The belief that promises were worth keeping. That truth mattered more than comfort. That one person noticing things could make a difference, if someone else was willing to listen. And sometimes on quiet Friday evenings, when the building was mostly empty and the city lights glittered below, that belief felt like enough. Felt like the legacy worth leaving. Felt like the promise worth keeping, no matter how expensive it became. Emma's photograph still sat on Noah's shelf in Queens, a reminder of why promises mattered. Her daughter still drew pictures of buildings and heroes, still believed that keeping promises was the most important thing. And somewhere between those two pieces of evidence, between memory and hope, there was a future worth building. One uncomfortable question at a time, one promise kept. One person who refused to look away standing beside another who refused to let them stand alone. That was enough. That would always be enough. The tower's lights stayed on through the night, watching over a city that never slept, protecting promises that would outlast any of them. And in the morning, the work would begin again.